Chapter 1339. When Kabbalah woke up, her arm was wrapped in thick bandages. She could still feel the pain, but it was insignificant compared to when she was sprayed by the red mist. She couldn't help but be slightly surprised. The wound on her arm wasn't fatal, so theoretically, it wouldn't be treated immediately. It wouldn't be strange if it was left until the end or simply waited for it to heal itself. After all, the characteristics and importance of the little angel's ability were repeatedly told to all new recruits. She didn't think that the Sand Nation would be given special treatment. If it was the bad side, it might be possible. But if it wasn't caused by her ability, how could the wound heal so quickly? Could it be? She suddenly felt a sense of unease. Perhaps she had to leave this place quickly and return to the military camp. Farah, right? A nurse noticed her actions and walked over to look at the name tag hanging on the bedside table. How do you feel now? It's nothing serious. I can return to the unit at any time. She got off the bed and pretended to be unwilling. A few of my comrades died at the hands of the demons. I want them to pay the price immediately. My condolences. The nurse nodded. But before that, you have to go to the camp's main tent. Miss Nana Pine wants to see you. Kabbalah was slightly shocked. He wants to see me? But my injuries are almost… I don't know the reason either, but she specifically told me to. The nurse smiled. The other soldiers can't even see you even if they want to. Come with me. Kabbalah looked at the nurse's defenseless back and followed after a moment of hesitation. After passing through layers of checkpoints, she saw the legendary angel in a tent. Based on her appearance alone, she did fit the image of the First Army. She was petite and cute, with rosy skin and a pair of eyes that didn't seem to have completely shed their childishness. She was basically a young lady from a noble family. Describing her as unweathered by wind and rain was the most appropriate. Kabbalah couldn't help but feel lucky. Maybe things weren't as bad as she thought. Why are you looking for me? Unfortunately, the other party's first sentence shattered all her fantasies. I'm very curious. You're clearly a witch, so why did you hide your identity and join the First Army like a normal person? I don't quite understand. Kabbalah braced herself and replied. So Jodl still reported this to the higher-ups, your injuries. Nana pointed to her arm. Although there are many lacerations, most of them are caused by a sharp weapon. The Devil's Claws can't do this. I think it should be a dagger or a bayonet. In addition, when I was cleaning the wound, I found traces of the red mist corrosion. The red mist can penetrate into the muscles beneath the skin and even reach the bones. Only witches can suffer from this kind of damage. Even if you purposely damage the wound, this cannot be faked. Kabbalah shut her mouth. The other party hadn't heard the news from Jodl, and he had explained it very clearly. It could be said that he didn't even leave her any room to argue. Previously, he had thought that the other party was naive, and that he could perhaps use words or feign ignorance to coax him out of this predicament. But now, it seemed that it was nothing more than a laughable plan. After a while, she whispered, "Have you ever seen a witch corroded by the red mist?" Nana curled her lips. "I can do it myself." Kabbalah was stunned. It said that the red mist can cause extremely serious harm to witches, but no one knows the specific treatment method, so I could only test it myself, the little girl said calmly. If a sister is really injured by the red mist and I can't do anything, wouldn't I regret it for the rest of my life? She paused. Fortunately, as long as they don't breathe in large amounts of the red mist or get hit in a vital area like the head, they can be saved in a short period of time. So remember, the next time you encounter this kind of situation, the safest thing to do is to immediately cut off your arm. Kabbalah was dumbfounded. Even now, she couldn't forget how intense the pain of being corroded by the red mist was. Usually, after experiencing it once, they definitely wouldn't want to try it a second time. But from the other party's tone, it seemed like she had repeated it several times. Yet when she said this, Nana's expression didn't change much, completely unable to be linked to her slightly immature appearance. A greenhouse flower from an aristocratic family? Don't joke around. She let out a long sigh. Now that she thought about it, although she used to be a divine lady, it seemed that she had never gained the upper hand in negotiations, whether it was the Queen of Clearwater or a little girl from the Northern Kingdom. My name is Kabbalah, and I come from the Sandstone clan. Fairy is just a pseudonym. Kabbalah gave up all struggle and revealed her past one by one. At this point, the First Army couldn't let her stay any longer, and because she had once served the great chief's archenemy, Princess Garcia of Grey Castle, it wasn't surprising that she was escorted back to Neverwinter for trial. Although Roland Wimbledon insisted on treating witches well, it didn't mean that he would treat the enemy's subordinates well. I'm very curious, during the battle in the Kingdom of Wolfheart, how did you deceive the church's pure witches? Nan asked. In addition to being able to order others, the art of instruction can also be used to order oneself. If it's only one person, it can even do some things that exceed one's own limits, and death is also one of them. Kabbalah slowly said, after receiving the order, the breathing and heartbeat will temporarily stop. At that time, the pure witches and the Judgment Army were still chasing after the Wolf King, so they didn't waste too much time on me. I see, the scar on your face was left at that time, right? Miss Pine pondered for a while. I don't quite understand. You said that you joined the First Army for the remaining clansmen, so why did you hide your identity and not even tell the clan that you were alive? What can I say? I led everyone to fight for an eternal oasis, but in the end, I was the only one who survived? Kabbalah revealed an indescribable bitterness. They entrusted their trust and hope to me, but I turned them into irrational monsters. Thousands of young and strong clansmen died in a foreign country, and the Sandstone clan was almost annexed. How could I still have the face to return to the clan? The First Army's recruitment of manpower from the Sand Nation made me realize that the only compensation I could make was to join the army and then use the merit I received to exchange for a green land for my clansmen to live in. The Sand Nation's inspection wasn't as strict as yours, so I fabricated an identity and gained Brian's trust during the siege of the Wildwave and Cutbone clans. She lowered her head and said, As for how you want to deal with me, it's fine, but please don't vent your anger on the Sandstone clan. The remaining clansmen are all children and women, and they have never served Garcia Wimbledon. I understand. Nana nodded. You can go back. Kabbalah couldn't react for a moment. I actually asked you to come here to ask if you want to remove the scar on your face. The little girl spread out her hands. But now, it seems that your answer is no. If that's the case, then I have nothing else to say. She opened her mouth but didn't know what to say. Yes, she had never had the upper hand in negotiations. In the past, when she negotiated with the Queen of Clearwater, she was often speechless, just like now, but the feeling between the two was so different. By the way, the Star Flower Troupe has a performance tonight. It's in the Western Pass camp. Nana smiled. If you return now, you might be able to see the end. Kabbalah bit her lip, bowed to her in the Sand Nation's etiquette, and then turned to leave the tent. Chapter 1340. Is this okay? Nana turned around. Vendi walked out from behind the curtain and smiled as she rubbed her head. You've already made your decision. Isn't it too late to ask me now? Because I don't know if it's good or bad, she pouted. I'm not as smart as Sister Anna, who's confident in everything she does. There aren't many people like her to begin with, Vendi said gently. So just choose the answer you feel you won't regret. Looking at the little girl's thoughtful expression, she couldn't help but feel a little emotional. He remembered the first time he met Nana. She was still a naive and innocent girl. When she saw a bird, she would go up and say a few words. When she saw blood, she would faint. Let alone thinking about others, she couldn't even understand her own problems. In just a little over 4 years, she had already learned to look at problems from other people's point of view and had her own subjective judgment. Her growth was astonishing. In reality, it wasn't just her. Lightning, Lorger, Lily, and even Mystery Moon had all clearly changed. Regardless of whether their choices were correct, at least they dared to make a choice. This was probably a characteristic of the younger generation. Vendi smiled bitterly. As for herself, she no longer had that kind of courage. Kabbalah walked all the way to the theater. She didn't need road signs to guide her. The lights and bustling voices under the night sky were the best signs. Her pace became faster and faster, gradually turning from walking to running. She didn't know why, but she felt as if her body had become much lighter. In the past, she had never been so eager to return to the First Army as soon as possible. She mobilized her magic and gave herself a small command. Find Jodl in the crowd. Of course, this was to find the squad as soon as possible. After all, he was the only survivor she could be sure of. Her body quickly passed through the crowd like a civet, her eyes constantly capturing the surrounding scenery and matching it with the memories in her mind. 15 minutes later, Kabbalah saw a familiar figure. Almost at the same time, the other party also noticed her. Jodl, that's great, you're all right. Before she could react, Jodl had already hugged her. Kabbalah instantly froze. If it had been any other time, she would have dodged to the side and even slapped him. But looking at Jodl, who was much more agitated than she was, her raised hand didn't manage to slap him. But it only lasted for a few breaths before Jodl came to his senses. In a panic, he loosened his grip and stammered, I forgot that I was just too happy, I didn't mean anything else. Kabbalah noticed that two other familiar faces were also walking in their direction. It seemed that the two of them were not the only survivors in the clock tower. She grabbed Jodl, who was apologizing, and pulled him into her arms. If you were in the Iron Sand City, you would have been dragged out and fed to the sand scorpions for your disrespectful behavior towards the Divine Lady. She whispered into his ear, but I'm not a goddess now, I'm a soldier from the Sand Nation. Do you understand? If you want to put on an act, then do it properly. Don't let others see any flaws. Otherwise, I won't let you off. Yes, I understand. Jada didn't dare to move. Very good, don't forget this. By the way, if I had pulled you up first, then it would have been your honor. Naturally, you wouldn't have had to be fed to the sand scorpions. Kabbalah paused. Now, go celebrate with your other teammates. It's great that you were able to leave the hospital so quickly. Is the injury on your arm serious? As they spoke, the other two had already gathered around. Everyone hugged each other and shared the joy of survival. On the temporarily built stage, the play was nearing its end. Thunderous applause filled the air. No one noticed this small interlude in the Nine Corps. At this moment, the commander-in-chief of the First Army, Iron Axe, stepped onto the stage. As he spoke, the crowd quickly quietened down. I know that in the past 8 days, you've all gone through a hellish ordeal. There has never been a war that was so harsh before. Because it didn't start for territory, power, or wealth. The demons only have one goal, and that is to destroy us all. Other than that, they don't need any compensation. So the enemy doesn't care whether we surrender or not, and they don't care about their own losses. Even if their casualties are far greater than ours, they definitely won't stop attacking. Even so, you all still managed to resist until now and survive this hellish ordeal. This is enough to show that although the demons are powerful when they go all out, there's still a limit. They aren't as invincible as the legends describe. The meaning of these 8 days of ordeal can be said to be no less than the Battle of Tequila. There, we defeated an army of demons. In the kingdom of Wolfheart, we faced 6 or 7 armies of demons. The enemy came out in full force, and from the West Mountain to the East Coast, their figures can be seen everywhere. But until now, we still haven't been destroyed. There was a commotion in the crowd. Iron Axe paused for a moment, then raised his voice. That's right. In order to avoid the brunt of their attack, I gave the order to temporarily withdraw from Metalstone Ridge and Gust Castle. Sand City and Sedimentation Bay might do the same, but this isn't a defeat, it's an opportunity to launch a counterattack. I know what you're worried about, but don't forget what I said before. This war has nothing to do with territory or wealth. The only goal is to destroy the enemy. We've only abandoned cold stones and empty houses, but the demons have paid the price of tens of thousands of casualties. You're the key to winning the war. As long as the First Army's strength remains, it's only a matter of time before we take back these cities. Sooner or later, the flames of war will spread to the Cage Mountain area, and this place will also become a battlefield. But before that, enjoy this night. Relax so that we can welcome a stronger challenge. after going through the trial of hell, will definitely return the favor in hell. Long live Grey Castle, long live His Majesty, long live mankind. As soon as Iron Axe finished his sentence, the camp erupted into an uproar. Everyone repeated the same slogan, and the doubts and worries in their hearts also melted. At the same time, an uplifting song sounded. Echo walked to the front of the stage step by step, drawing the curtain to the end of the play. In the passionate song, Kabbalah seemed to see the scene of the army sweeping through the demons' camp like a flood. She knew that this was a kind of ability, but she didn't deliberately resist it. Feeling the united voice of the people, she felt that this wasn't bad. Kabbalah glanced at Jodl, who was cheering loudly, and couldn't help but have a thought. When the war ended and the Sandstone clan had a stable place to live, she would probably be forgiven by her clansmen, right? At that time, she could find Miss Nana Pine to remove her scar. Chapter 1341. The next day, after Iron Axe returned to the Cage Mountain Command post on the Seagull, he immediately went to the General Staff office. How was the trip? Edith was sitting at the mahogany table, leisurely sipping black tea. Everyone had been so busy these days that it was common for them to work until the wee hours of the morning, but she still maintained a delicate image, as if she was born with more energy and time than others. Even Iron Axe admired this kind of ability. "Morale is available," he replied briefly. "Then we can proceed to the next step of the plan." The Pearl of the Northern Region smiled. "By the way, last night, the garrison of Sand City also withdrew from the defensive area. Then the Sedimentation Bay is the only place left." Iron Axe looked at the big map on the wall. "I suggest that they withdraw as soon as possible and send a troop to reinforce them. There's no need to wait until the defensive line is breached." Iron Axe nodded. He agreed with this judgment. Currently, there were probably more than 50,000 demons gathering from the west to the east. This number could easily surround the entire Sedimentation Bay. Once the army converged, the First Army would not be able to find a suitable time to retreat. Since their strategic goal was not to occupy a city or a territory, it was natural for them to abandon the Sedimentation Bay in order to protect their troops. Ever since the enemy launched the massive attack, the evacuation had not stopped. The residents and merchants who had been maintaining the operation of the city were sent out first, followed by the aristocratic families and nobles who had submitted to Roland. At this moment, the city was just a huge empty shell. As long as the order was given, the garrison could move immediately. I don't quite understand." Agatha, who was flipping through the latest battle report, suddenly murmured. "What's the problem?" Iron Axe walked up to her. "The difference between the number of casualties and the number of enemies killed is more than 30 times. How did they do it? Since the 4 cities had faced off against the enemy in the past week, and the reports were sent in batches, they had to be manually compiled. To prevent miscalculation, she repeatedly checked the formula in her hand, but the answer was still the same. According to the statistics, the 4 cities had suffered a total of more than 1,500 casualties, but the number of enemies killed was as high as 50,000. This could already be described as inconceivable. If this was the era of the Union, Agatha would not have hesitated to think that this was a deliberate falsification of military exploits. However, she had fought with the First Army many times, and under the system of multiple checks, it was unlikely that such a problem would occur. Even if the error of 10 to 20% was thrown out, it would not change the essence. When the First Army was on the northern expedition to the Fertile Plains, they had only faced 20,000 demons. At that time, they relied on the railway that stretched for hundreds of kilometers and built one fortress after another. It took them nearly a year to win the Battle of Tequila. And this time, the strategy of the General Staff was to continuously retreat, yet they managed to achieve twice the results of the Fertile Plains in 8 days? Although she was full of confidence in the humans of today, this result still shocked her. Agatha had thought that this battle would be intense and inextricable. "I see." Edith chuckled after reading the Ice Witch's statistics. "To be honest, the effect of this plan slightly exceeded my expectations. But it's not all the work of the First Army. The cooperation of the demons was also very important. Hacksword was probably badly injured during the ambush, so he didn't have the energy to control the details of the front line. That's the only reason? Agatha asked incredulously. I know what you're confused about. Edith waved her hand. It seems that we only retreated a few times in exchange for such a result. The battle plan is so simple that it can be summarized in one sentence, but in fact, it's not like that. You often stayed in the rear during the era of the Union, so it's normal that you don't understand. To put it simply, only the current First Army can carry out this strategy. Even the First Army during the expedition to the Tequila ruins couldn't do it. At least not better than they are now, the Pearl of the Northern Region explained. The Pearl of the Northern Region explained, there's often only a thin line between retreat and defeat. It's extremely difficult to maintain order under great pressure, let alone evacuate in an orderly manner. If it were any other noble army, I'm afraid that dispersing in disorder would be the best performance. If it weren't for the First Army's experience in the Tequila night attack and the previous evacuation team's performance in carrying out orders, I wouldn't have dared to carry out this plan at all. In addition, the new weapons are also very useful. At least in the city streets, without the support of the Longsong cannons, they can still rely on the firepower of general-purpose machine guns and field cannons to compete with the enemy. The biggest advantage of firearms is distance. Once the entire army is mobilized, they will always have the upper hand, and it's only natural that we achieve this result. Edith paused here. But it's also true that we've lost the outer line of defense, so the next step is the key to the whole plan. Once the demons take over the 4 cities, they will definitely start planning the next round of attacks. Cage Mountain is both a barrier and a raw material source for the glory of the sun, so we can't use the method of exchanging land for people. We must further reduce the enemy's strength before they recover. Red Mist, Agatha said in a low voice. That's right. These 4 cities are already outside the Red Mist area, so the demons' reliance on their supply lines will definitely increase. It's also very likely that the bloodlines will reappear. Currently, the battle lines span almost the entire kingdom of Wolfheart, so I don't think they can take care of everything. Before the mist storage towers are built, the demons can only rely on the fortress-like monstrous beasts and human transportation, Iron Axe added. Previously, their attacks from the flanks all started with the monstrous beasts, but according to Lightning and Maggie's observations, after losing a large number of mad demons, their protection of the monstrous beasts is no longer as good as before. Also, when attacking the 4 cities, the main demon supply lines were all hidden in the Red Mist area, but now they will be exposed to the First Army. The problem is that this means we need to take the initiative. Agatha hesitated. The fortress-like monstrous beasts can move on their own, and they aren't afraid of the aerial night strafing. We can only send ground troops to destroy them. But we can see the enemy, and the enemy can also see us. Even if the protection of the monstrous beasts is reduced, they can still send reinforcements at the last moment. Taking into account the journey back and forth, we may very well lose the advantage of distance. If the demons catch up to us, in a battle without concealment, even if the First Army could repel the demons, they would definitely suffer heavy losses. So speed is everything. The corners of her lips curled up. As long as we can counterattack before the enemy can react, it'll be fine. But how could they achieve this? Agatha turned her gaze to the map, trying to find a shortcut from Cage Mountain to the 4 cities. There were quite a few roads between the 2 places. Among them were former trade routes, as well as hard roads built later on to speed up the evacuation. They spread between the 4 cities and Cage Mountain like a spider web, but these roads didn't have the ability to shorten the distance. Not to mention the fact that the First Army didn't have any cavalry. Even if they had a large number of horses, it was hard to say if they could catch up to the fortress-like monstrous beasts. Furthermore, the firepower that light cavalry could carry was limited and wasn't suitable to deal with those huge monsters. Of course not now. The Pearl of the Northern Region seemed to have seen through her confusion. This plan still lacks a crucial factor. Only when it is in place will all the conditions be met. But according to the plan, you'll see it very soon. Chapter 1342. 3 days later, the defenders of the sedimentation bay successfully withdrew from the encirclement before the demons closed in. 80% of the territory of the Kingdom of Wolfheart had fallen into the hands of the demons. The first army was concentrated at the West Pass and the Central Pass of the Cage Mountain, which were the only two natural passageways between the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Dawn. On the same day, the first main road connecting the north and south was finally completed. The cement roads extending from both sides merged into one at the Central Pass of the Cage Mountain, which meant that Neverwinter had a direct road to the Kingdom of Wolfheart. When the first hump convoy slowly appeared at the end of the horizon, the onlookers gasped. "What's that? It's like a hill. It has wheels. I think it's a car. Even the outer shell is made of iron. How much money did it cost? If it were pulled by horses, I'm afraid even 10 horses wouldn't be able to pull it." Ignorant people. White glanced around at his colleagues and showed a disdainful expression. They were making a fuss about nothing. If they saw those iron birds that could fly in the air, their eyeballs would probably fall out of their sockets. White was not here to celebrate the opening of the road for the Grey Castle people. Like most of the coachmen, he was here to receive a good commission. Ever since he encountered the demons in the hinterland of the Kingdom of Wolfheart, he dared not step into any territory other than the Grey Castle people's territory. After all, it was already a blessing from God to encounter an Iron Bird rescue mission. He did not think that he would be so lucky as to run into the Grey Castle people every time. White was inspired by the logistics team that the refugees had organized. Although the income was not as good as the transportation team, it was safer. Moreover, no matter how thin and weak his horse and carriage were, they were still better than the refugees' carts. However, he was not the only one who noticed this. As the demons approached and the townspeople evacuated, many of the coachmen also moved to the rear like him. The originally spontaneous team had suddenly grown a lot stronger, and it was almost like an industry. Thinking of this, White was somewhat upset. He had come here first, but he still had to compete with these young lads. If Smarty was here, he would probably have formed his own transport team by now, right? In just a short while, those huge objects had arrived in front of them. Heavy and clumsy as they looked, they were not much slower than carriages. Especially when its body was fully revealed, even White, who prided himself on being knowledgeable, felt a strong sense of oppression coming from it. There was no other reason other than the fact that these vehicles were too big. Just the wheels alone were half the height of a person, and the width was thicker than a person's body. The steel rims were wrapped in a layer of pitch-black gelatinous material, and it was indescribably stable on the road. Looking back at the carriage that he had originally treated as a treasure, White even felt a sense of inferiority. Through the glass window of the carriage, he looked at the coachman, who was looking down at him from above, and the feeling was even more obvious. White couldn't help but think that if he used it to pull the goods, how many times would it be able to pull the goods with his carriage? It had to be at least 10 times. According to Grey Castle's pricing method, that would be 10 times the income. They issued a commission. Someone shouted, and the people immediately stopped talking and rushed into the camp. Although the carrying capacity of these never-before-seen carriages was much higher than that of carriages and handcarts, they still had to rely on them to deliver the goods to the various camps and mountains. White was no exception. However, there was a lingering thought in his mind. It would be great if he could have a carriage like this. Farina pulled the handbrake and jumped out of the driver's compartment. She did not expect that she would eventually return to the Kingdom of Wolfheart in such a way. Although she had made up her mind, she was, after all, a member of the church. Even if she passed the screening, the administrative office might not necessarily allow her to go to the front. However, no one came to remind Farina that she was once a sinner, and the driver's route arrangement was completely based on her results. It only took her a week to master all the driving skills of the steam-powered truck, and she also passed the final test with full marks. When she proposed to be responsible for the transportation of the route from the Windward Territory to the Sparkling River, the officer in charge immediately agreed. This was not the first time she had passed this checkpoint. Although the surrounding scenery was similar to what she remembered, the overall appearance was very different. There were many temporary houses and tents near the checkpoint, dark hard roads could be seen everywhere, and barricades, sentry towers, and barbed wire fences divided the camp into several distinct areas. No matter which area it was, she could see many figures bustling about. Even without asking, she could feel that the air here was filled with the smell of war. This smell was so familiar to Farina that she was slightly absent-minded. "What's wrong?" Joe's voice interrupted her turbulent thoughts. "No, nothing." Farina shook her head. "I think I've already got the answer." As a member of the Judgment Army, she had a deeper understanding of the power of Grey Castle than most people. If the opponent was just a noble, the First Army would not have needed to put up such a formation. If everything in front of her was an illusion created to deceive her, then she thought too highly of herself. Only the legendary demons could make Roland fight with all his strength. Then next we help the King of Grey Castle win first. Farina lowered her eyelids. "This is the beginning of my atonement. I'll be with you until the end." Joe gently held her hands. "Is that Farina and Joe from the second convoy?" A voice suddenly sounded behind them, interrupting them from looking at each other. "Yes, what can I do for you?" Farina coughed twice and turned around guiltily. The man who looked like an officer first saluted and then said, "The Commander-in-Chief of the First Army, Sir Iron Axe, wants to meet all the drivers of the hump. He's now in the Cage Mountain Command Center. Please follow me." During the training, the convoy members had been told that logistics and transportation were also a part of military operations. Compared to the scheduled transportation plan, they should follow the Army's deployment first. Farina and Joe looked at each other and then nodded. As soon as she entered the Cage Mountain Command Center and saw everyone present, Farina realized that this meeting might not be as simple as it seemed. At least, it would not be a simple greeting party. Because the woman standing in the middle of the crowd had beautiful gray hair, which was the symbol of the royal bloodline of Grey Castle. When someone stood up and introduced her, she was even more certain of her judgment. Princess Tilly of Grey Castle, the Commander-in-Chief of the First Army, Iron Axe, the Commander of the First Army, the Commander of the Artillery Battalion, Brian, the Commander of the Gun Battalion, and Agatha, the Commander of the Witch Union. It could be said that all the high-level officials of the front line had gathered in this hall. "Welcome to the Cage Mountain." Iron Axe went straight to the point. "I have a mission for you." Chapter 1343. I know you're not soldiers, and I also know that a group of people from the First Army's Reserve Force and the Second Army are training to drive steam trucks, but time waits for no one. Iron Axe's calm eyes swept over the crowd. Since you're the first batch of drivers to pass the test and achieve excellent results, it means that you're good enough to take on this task. The task is very simple. Roland walked up to the map on the table and moved a chess piece from the Kingdom of Dawn to a black line in the eastern part of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. This place is about 150 kilometers away from the central checkpoint. All you need to do is to transport the people and supplies in the vehicles here and bring them back after the attack. You'll stay here for about half an hour. If you're lucky, you won't even encounter the enemy. At this point, Iron Axe paused. There was a commotion in the crowd. After all, the other meaning of this sentence was that if they were unlucky, they would encounter the devil. After waiting for a while, the Commander-in-Chief continued, "Of course, the First Army will still be responsible for the battle. You just need to focus on driving. There are a total of 10 trucks arriving at Cage Mountain, and according to the plan, 4 to 5 trucks will be enough to achieve the mission. Therefore, according to the usual practice of the administrative office, we'll recruit people to set off. Every time you complete a transportation task to and fro the front, you'll get an extra bonus of 3 times the salary. This bonus will be paid by the First Army and has nothing to do with the salary given by the administrative office. So, those who are willing to accept the task, please step forward." Farina stepped forward without hesitation. To her slight surprise, all the trucks chose to accept the task. The only difference was the speed at which they made the decision. She had come to the front line to see the demons, and she had once served in the Judgment Army, so she had long been accustomed to stepping onto the battlefield. But the others were different. Apart from their identities as drivers, most of them were just free citizens of Neverwinter. There was no doubt that they had full trust in the First Army to make this decision. Iron Axe quickly picked out 5 trucks in order, including the second truck that Farina was in. "I'll leave them to you." The commander-in-chief looked at Van. "The battle will officially begin at dawn tomorrow. I can't help but feel a little worried." After all the drivers left the command center, Agatha said in a low voice, "The number of people dispatched is small, but it requires the close cooperation of the entire army. Moreover, there are ordinary citizens among them, and the training time is less than a day. This kind of arrangement is too urgent." She finally understood what the Pearl of the Northern region meant by lightning speed. Judging from the plan alone, the plan was indeed highly feasible. The simple hardened road that was previously repaired for the migration had now become the foundation of their counterattack. Even if its width, thickness, and construction quality were not comparable to the main artery project, it was still much better than gravel or dirt roads. Under the condition of further limiting the load, it was not impossible for the vehicle to run. Over a distance of 200 kilometers, the average speed of the Rubik's Cube steam truck was much higher than that of any cavalry. Even if the latter did not care about the horsepower and switched between 2 riders, it would still take them 2 days. If it were a truck, they would basically be able to complete the journey in 6 to 8 hours, not to mention the heavy equipment that this counterattack squad could carry. The only problem was that not only did it include all the soldiers of the First Army, it also included non-combat personnel. It was hard to predict what kind of unexpected situation they would encounter. There are certain unexpected factors in this battle, but compared to the benefits, it is almost negligible, Edith said frankly. The demons may deploy the fortress-like monstrous beasts at any time. Instead of waiting for an opportunity, we might as well seize the opportunity now. I don't think the enemy would expect us to launch a counterattack on them less than a day after the humans lost the sedimentation bay. The most likely outcome of failure is returning with nothing, while success will cause the demons' subsequent actions to be thwarted. It goes without saying which choice to make. Furthermore, war is full of surprises. Sometimes, a seemingly thorough plan can be ruined by a small coincidence. At this point, she broke into a smile. "So, let's pray that the god of luck is on our side." The next day, 7 o'clock in the morning. There was a light breeze and light snow. Under the dusky sky, 5 steam-powered trucks formed a long line as they slowly drove out of the tranquil camp and headed east. Unlike when they were transporting goods, gray and white tarpaulins were set up at the back of the carriages, looking like small moving piles of snow from afar. 3 of the trucks were dragging 152mm long song cannons, the long black barrels blending into the ruts of the carriages. Only when one got closer would one notice the faint cold light refracted from the hydraulic brake. 2 hours later, 25 fully fueled biplanes took off from Thorntown's landing strip and rushed to the predetermined battlefield under the lead of Seagull. Unlike their usual battles, the Air Night Squadron did not choose to fly at a lower altitude where it was easier to identify their direction. Instead, they flew straight into the clouds, flying through the gaps between the clouds. This meant that they would lose a large portion of their field of vision. Other than the compass, the only thing that could guide them was the faintly discernible body of Seagull. Once they fell behind, it would be almost impossible to find the fleet again. In order to avoid getting lost, everyone was on full alert. Other than the roar of the engines, there was not a single sound of conversation in the cabin. At the same time, Lightning and Maggie appeared in the airspace of the battlefield and separately searched for any possible demons. 2 hours and 15 minutes after the start of the operation, the first accident appeared in the convoy. Due to the quality of the road, the 4th convoy broke down while crossing a pit. After a simple transfer, the convoy resumed its journey, leaving only the malfunctioning crew to repair it. Half an hour later, the Air Night Squadron also had an accident. 2 planes lost track of the plane in front when they flew over an overlapping cloud layer. They could only turn around and return alone according to the rules before they set off. On the way back, they were not allowed to leave the cloud layer. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. 3 hours and 6 minutes later, the steam truck team was the first to arrive at their destination. "Oh my God, Farina!" Joe leaned forward slightly and murmured, "I see it." Farina steadily stopped the car and stared at the side of the driver's seat with a solemn expression. Through the windshield, she saw a bone-like frame standing on the top of a mountain in the distance. At first glance, it looked only 1/3 the size of a fingertip, but considering the distance, she could imagine how astonishing the behemoth was. Around the white bone, there was a bright red fog that almost covered the entire mountain, forming a sharp contrast with the surrounding snowy scenery. It was definitely not a human creation. Just by looking at it, one could feel a cold chill rising from the bottom of one's heart. Farina involuntarily tightened her grip on the steering wheel. There was no doubt that the devil had come to the world. Chapter 1344. Now, guys, get out of the car. Act according to the drill. Hurry up. The shouts from the back of the carriage brought Farina back to reality. "Let's go and help," she said to Joe, then pushed open the door and jumped out of the cockpit. In just a few short breaths, the passengers of the convoy were already busy. They wrote and drew in their notebooks while erecting a few strange instruments on the ground. Judging from their conversation, those instruments seemed to be used to locate the target for the soldiers. At this point, no matter how slow Farina was, she already knew what the First Army was going to do. They were going to bombard the enemy several kilometers away from here. Although she had long known that the people of Grey Castle were best at long-range attacks with firearms, she still felt a trace of shock when she saw this scene with her own eyes. Any thrown weapon would be affected by the wind and its own weight, and the further the distance, the greater the impact. Even the slightest disturbance would cause a great change in the outcome. How on earth did they ensure that the bullets fired from the firearms would still fly according to their expectations at such a long distance? Could it be that those seemingly simple instruments could predict the future? If so, it was not surprising that the church suffered a crushing defeat in the Battle of Cold Wind Ridge. However, this kind of technical work was completely useless to Farina. She consciously walked to the rear of the convoy, hoping to contribute to the unloading of the goods. Due to the requirement of confidentiality, the driver did not know in advance who was on the vehicle, nor did he know what was on the vehicle. However, the convoy must have been dragging a lot of things. At this time, at least one more person could at least speed up the preparation process. She might not be good at other things, but she was by no means weak. However, the scene in the rear left her dumbfounded. A group of tall and sturdy men were moving the long wooden boxes with great efficiency, and those heavy trailing firearms didn't seem too cumbersome in their hands. After removing the restrictions of the connectors, a few people surrounded the long steel pipe and dragged it down the hardened road. What surprised Farina even more was that she actually saw several familiar faces in the crowd. Wait, aren't they the God's Punishment Army? Although they were not wearing armor, judging from their strength, skills, and appearance, it was clear that they were the outstanding warriors of Hermes. "Yo, we meet again." Suddenly, someone patted her shoulder. Hearing this familiar voice, Farina suddenly turned around. "Zoe? I didn't expect you to remember my name." Zoe grinned. "I thought you would call me Army Commander Inova first." She took a deep breath. "Then these people are, yes, they are all tequila witches?" Zoe spread out her hands. "See, I didn't lie to you, did I? There are hundreds of people like me in Neverwinter. All of them are using the bodies you contributed. Remember not to make a fuss when you meet familiar people in the future." The other party's words replayed in his ears. For a moment, Farina did not know what to say. Charles bowed deeply to the latter. "Miss Zoe, I've always felt sorry that I didn't have the chance to thank you last time. It's great to see you again. Thank you for saving Miss Farina." "Miss Zoe? Mortal, you know a lot. I'll accept your gratitude." Zoe shrugged. "Let's talk about other things later. Now, let's focus on dealing with the demons." "Well," Farina could not help saying as she watched Charles leave. Zoe stopped. "Thank you. And I'm very sorry for the mistakes the church has made. It's not your fault. You're just a person who was deceived." She waved her hand, and without looking back, she walked towards the camp that was being set up. Farina opened her mouth, but in the end, it turned into a sigh. But what she did not see was that Zoe slightly curled up the corner of her mouth. Just as Iron Axe had predicted, she, as the pilot, was unable to help at all. In less than 15 minutes, the first army was ready to shoot. Report, number 1, number 2, and number 3 cannons have been loaded. Open fire! The commander ordered decisively. Following a loud bang, a veil-like snow mist rose up from the bottom of the cannon, and the roar reverberated endlessly in the mountains like a thunderclap rolling across the horizon. The boiling hot shell casings sizzled as they were emptied into the snow, and new shells were quickly loaded, waiting for the next shot. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water, and the teamwork between the cannoneers was as if they were one person. From this detail, it could be seen how much they had trained. Farina realized that the difference between the first army and the other armies was not just in firearms. After a dozen breaths, she finally saw a snow pillar rise from the top of the mountain. The ground troops have started shooting. Sylvie, who was on the Seagull, could see it more clearly. After the 3 shells drew a long parabola, they all landed near the fortress-like monstrous beast, with the closest one less than 300 meters away. The sudden explosion caused the demons stationed in the surroundings to fall into chaos, and a few devil beasts flapped their wings and flew into the sky. After informing the commander of the cannoneers below her of the correction information, she focused all her attention on the enemy's movements. How are the demons reacting? Tilly asked. There are no signs of the main target moving, and only a few devil beasts have flown into the sky. It shouldn't be long before they discover the truck team. You're lucky. Andrea whistled. Indeed, good luck. Sylvie nodded imperceptibly. According to the plan formulated by the General Staff, the counterattack team was prepared to be discovered before they could approach the fortress-like monstrous beast and continue firing at the target despite the obstruction of the patrolling devil beasts. This plan was based on the experience accumulated from fighting the demon's vanguard on the fertile plains. If the opponent was Osrook, 20 to 15 kilometers was already a high-risk zone. Although a large number of troops had been sent to the sedimentation bay after a huge battle, there were still many devil beasts and guards stationed near the fortress as it was an extremely important moving obelisk. However, their perimeter was not watertight, and for a long time, no devil beasts flew past this area. It was precisely because the enemy had not discovered the counterattack team that Tilly had gotten Sylvie to continue guiding the truck forward, and only when they were 8 kilometers away from the target did they switch to the artillery position. This could only mean that the enemy had relaxed after taking over the 4 cities. A moment later, the second round of artillery shells whistled through the air. The calibrated second round of attacks was clearly much more accurate. 2 of them pierced through the monstrous beast's towering skeleton and landed at its feet one after the other, killing several mad demons. The third shot directly penetrated the monstrous beast's wide back, causing a cloud of snow and flesh to rise. The monstrous beast let out an ear-piercing shriek and at the same time took 2 steps forward. More devil beasts flew out from all directions and formed a formation in the air. However, by the time they confirmed where the attack came from, it was already 5 minutes later. This was definitely not considered slow in previous battles, but against the Longsong cannons 8 kilometers away, 5 minutes was enough for the artillerymen to fire 10 rounds of artillery fire, and this included the time needed to adjust the firing parameters. The operation this time was not like the Battle of Tequila, where the battle ended with a precise, leg-breaking strike, but to the enemy, the result was much more tragic. The skeletal body that had been repeatedly bombarded was already riddled with wounds, and there were several bullet holes all over it. Through the layers of broken bones, one could see the trembling organs and blue blood flowing everywhere below. Although it tried its best to escape, compared to the firing speed of the cannons, this attempt did not have much of an effect. When another artillery shell drilled into the monstrous beast's body, it let out a mournful wail, and after a flash of blue light, its huge body actually exploded. Organs and blood splattered down like a waterfall, dyeing the snow on the hillside with a layer of strange color. The empty limbs seemed to have lost their support as they powerlessly snapped, peeled off, and collapsed, crashing into the bodies of the devil beasts that could not dodge in time, crushing them into a pile of twisted rags. "Be careful, they're coming." At the same time, Sylvie also warned the convoy of the approaching devil beasts. Chapter 1345. The enemy has found us. Hurry up, pack your things and get on the truck. Everyone, retreat according to the original route. Although she did not know why the First Army was so familiar with the demon's movements, Farina flew to the truck as soon as she heard the order. She skillfully closed the exhaust valve and pushed the two handles that controlled the Rubik's Cube switch to the starting position. The cylinder at the front of the truck began to tremble, and the needle of the pressure gauge moved to the right at a speed visible to the naked eye. Soon it reached the standard point. This meant that as long as she released the brake, the truck could move at any time. She poked her head out and looked in the direction of the hillside. The mountain top, which had been shrouded in mist, was now much clearer. The miasma-like red mist was dissipating at a speed visible to the naked eye. At the same time, many sesame-sized black spots appeared on the white hillside. They surged down the slope and rushed in the direction of the convoy, like a swarm of ants coming out of their nest. Dozens of flying demons appeared in the sky, and it seemed that they would not let them go. This scene reminded Farina of the city wall on the Hermes Plateau. There, tens of thousands of demonic beasts had attacked the defense line formed by the Judgment Army. "Let's go!" A god's punishment which patted the door of her truck, which was a signal that all the team members were ready to retreat. Farina took a deep breath and pulled the brake lever. The steam truck began to move slowly. At this time, the other convoys also started their trucks. From turning around to driving out of the shooting area, everyone did a perfect job, even better than during the assessment. Even so, the distance between them and the enemy was not widened. When the convoy accelerated to the highest speed, the pursuers from the air were even closer to them. No, they're too fast. If this goes on, they'll catch up with us." Joe shouted anxiously. Farina held the steering wheel tightly and did not move. It was common sense that those with wings would always run faster than those on the ground. Since the enemy even had a flying unit, it was only a matter of time before they caught up with them. Considering that the people of Grey Castle had been fighting with the demons for a long time, they should know this. Now the only hope was that they had already prepared for this situation. No matter how the First Army responded, it would be a battle that she could not intervene in. Therefore, her most important task at the moment was to control the truck well and not drag the others down. "Don't worry about the pursuers. Help me keep an eye on the road ahead. If there's a hole, warn me as soon as possible," she said without changing her expression. Joe swallowed hard and nodded. "I got it." For more than an hour, the only thing Good could see was the tail of Seagull and the flashing track lights. Being in the clouds for a long time made him lose his sense of direction and altitude. Flying in this state was a huge drain on his physical and mental strength. He had to focus all his attention to maintain the plane's position. Judging from the changes in the compass, the Air Night Squadron had been hovering in the air for the rest of the time, clearly waiting for the enemy to appear. As for the whereabouts of his other companions and the current situation, Good had no idea at all. In addition to this lingering feeling of loss and depression, the terrible environment in the clouds was also a big problem. The damp water vapor had condensed into a thin layer of frost on the windshield and cabin. Although the cold wind was blocked by the rubber lining of the flight suit, the humidity still brought away some of his body temperature, making his limbs as slow as a block of wood. If not for Finkin, who could talk to him in the back seat, he was afraid that he would not have lasted until now. Princess Tilly had revealed that His Majesty was researching a communication device that could allow people in 2 different places to communicate across space. At this moment, the biggest thought in his mind was to make this device a reality as soon as possible. "Look, the light has changed," Finkin suddenly shouted. Good looked at Seagull and saw that the yellow light hanging at the tail of the plane had unknowingly turned bright red. He could not help but feel excited. Red was a signal to attack. Once the track lights glowed red, it meant that they should immediately fly down out of the clouds and attack the enemy. As for who the enemy was, it did not matter. It was better than continuing to go around in circles in this labyrinthine cloud layer. Without hesitation, Good pressed down on the control stick. The pure white clouds immediately enveloped him. The moment his vision was restored, Good felt his entire body lighten. The black and white earth and the gray skies seemed to form a beautiful scene. At the same time, there was also a group of devil beasts flying in the sky. The latter completely did not notice the aerial knights that suddenly emerged from the clouds. They were less than 300 meters above the ground, and their target was obviously the steam truck squad that was dragging long-wheel ruts in the snow. The nose of their plane happened to be facing the direction of the enemy, which was an excellent angle for engagement. As long as the plane was slightly pitched, the bullets from the machine guns would be able to penetrate the enemy's formation lengthwise. Moreover, the aerial knight had an absolute advantage in altitude. After a round of strafing, no matter how the devil beasts reacted, they would not be able to shake off the biplane's follow-up pursuit. It was as perfect as in the textbooks. The gloominess that had previously hidden in the clouds was swept away. Good controlled the plane to dive down, and at the same time, he pressed the trigger. Finkin, who was sitting in the back seat, let out a strange cry. In an instant, more than a dozen silver streamers appeared in the sky. They shot into the herd of devil beasts from different angles and spread from the head to the tail. Faced with this sudden attack, the demons had no time to react. Several flowers of blood blossomed in the air, and the mad demons and devil beasts that were hit fell to the ground like stones. At this moment, they realized that they were not the only hunters on this battlefield. The herd of devil beasts suddenly dispersed. Some of them continued to pounce on the convoy, while others turned around and seemed to want to fight to the death with the aerial knight. 26 devil beasts. Good quickly counted the number of devil beasts. In a sense, the number of people on both sides was almost equal. Apart from the few patrolling devil beasts that they had encountered before, this could be regarded as the first large-scale aerial battle between them. "Signal Heinz and tell him to follow behind us," he shouted at the top of his lungs. In a short span of 20 seconds, the aerial knight squadron had already flown over the devil beasts' heads. The first round had ended with their complete victory. With the speed brought by the dive, the fire of heaven, that Good piloted quickly completed a turn and cut in a perfect arc from the side to the back of a devil beast that was trying hard to climb up. The distance between the two was less than 200 meters. He could even see the mad demon trying hard to turn around, trying to find the best angle to throw its spear. However, he obviously would not give the other party this opportunity. The barrel of the gun spat out a tongue of flame. The bright tracer bullet pierced through the back of the devil beast like a meteor. The sudden fall of the mount made its attempt futile. Even if it was not hit on the spot by the machine gun, the result from falling from this height was no different. Finkin could not help but whistle. The other teammates also locked onto their targets, and the two sides quickly engaged in a fierce battle. The second round began. Chapter 1346. Right for o'clock, two of them. His teammates' warnings mixed with the sound of machine gun fire, sounding intermittent. Pension, spear throwing. Good suddenly pushed the stick to the left, and the biplane immediately flipped over and fell downwards at a slanted angle. Whoosh! The bone spears whistled past the top of his head, and one of them directly pierced through the upper wing, leaving a fist-sized hole in the skin. Without even looking at the enemy, he continued to accelerate downwards, and the plane soon reached its top speed. This was the combat strategy that Her Highness Tilly had come up with after the aerial knight's battle with the enemy. At low speeds, the devil beasts possessed far greater agility than biplanes. They could hover in the air, complete maneuvers such as turning around and flying backwards within a very small radius. This made it very difficult to use tactical maneuvers to escape from the devil beast's tail bites. At the same time, the rear seat shooter was almost unable to predict the target's route within the effective firing range. The combination of these two factors was extremely disadvantageous for a dogfight. But at the same time, the devil beasts also had a very obvious weakness. Their only means of attack came from the spears thrown by the rider behind them, and their flying and climbing speed was inferior to the fire of heaven. A magic stone that could only be thrown twice consecutively would pose a threat in terms of distance and power, and only at close range would it pose a threat. Therefore, when being targeted by the enemy, the safest way to fight was to use the belly of the plane to face the enemy, and at the same time, quickly increase the distance between the two, and then climb back up again, using the machine gun's longer effective firing range to kill the enemy. The biplane was equipped with protective plates in both cockpits, which could effectively protect the pilot from being directly pierced by the spears. The wide wings seemed like an extremely fragile target, but as long as the main frame was not hit, a few holes in it would not cause fatal damage to the plane. Compared to the current training plane, the Fire of Heaven had a major improvement, which was to incorporate the wing surface roll control into the main control stick. The pilot only needed one hand to easily control the pitch and direction of the plane. Once the plane reached full speed, it would only take a few seconds to shake off the enemy. During this time, the Mad Demon could at most throw 2 bone spears, and it was not easy to hit the rapidly departing plane. Multiple battles had proven the effectiveness of this method. So far, the Air Knight had lost several planes, but not a single person had died on the battlefield. Accompanied by the high-pitched roar of the engine, Good flew hundreds of meters in the blink of an eye. Even if the Mad Demon behind him wanted to throw its spear again, it would not have the chance to reach him. But after he pulled up the nose of the plane, he did not immediately turn around to look for the 2 demons that had their eyes on him. Instead, he looked at the other friendly plane that had its tail bitten. As for the enemies behind them, Heinz was waiting for them. Using the advantage of height and field of vision he had accumulated, he would attack the enemies that were chasing after him. At the same time, he would leave his tail for his teammates to protect. This was the second principle of the Aerial Knight. After 2 attacks, Good got his 4th kill. The Aerial Knight gradually gained the upper hand on the battlefield. At this time, Lightning and Maggie also joined the battle. All the demons were horrified to find that a giant demon of their kind had appeared in the sky, appearing and disappearing from time to time. It looked incomparably powerful, but its target was themselves. The devil beasts showed obvious fear under the sudden appearance of the giant mouth. Even if the Mad Demon angrily pulled the reins, the devil beasts could not move as fast as before. This confusion further increased the disadvantage of the demons. Lightning shuttled through the battlefield like a ghost. Her short-distance flight at the speed of sound made it impossible for the Mad Demons to fight back. Often, when the Mad Demons raised their bone spears, Lightning's revolver was already at the back of their heads. Every few minutes, a devil beast would be shot down. It was as if a devil rain was falling from the sky. Naturally, Farina saw the sound of these behemoths falling to the ground. She saw with her own eyes a winged monster with blood all over its body crash into the snow not far from the road. The strong impact caused it to roll several times before it stopped. Its wings and limbs were flung everywhere like rags. What happened in the sky? There was no doubt that the First Army was prepared for the enemies coming from the sky. However, she could only think of the firearms that were specially used to deal with the demons. Until now, she had not heard the sharp hissing of the machine guns at the back of the carriage. Instead, there was a strange buzzing sound coming from above, as if there was a fierce battle going on. The problem was, in the sky? Farina could not hold back her curiosity. She took the opportunity when the carriages passed a straight road to look at the sky behind them. And this one glance caused all the blood in her body to boil. God! She could not help but murmur. Beneath the low clouds, silver streaks of light flickered incessantly like the first rays of dawn. The source of the light was a flock of uniquely shaped gray birds. Unlike the red mist skeletons that gave her a strange feeling, Farina could clearly feel that the giant birds that were fighting the demons were man-made. The birds were symmetrical, balanced, and square, revealing the beauty of war weapons. But precisely because of this, she was even more shocked. Since when were humans able to fly into the sky like birds and step into the realm that only belonged to the gods? Could we actually do this? She couldn't help but recall an article she had read in the Grey Castle Weekly. On the front page, there was a black and white picture. In the picture, the huge machine seemed to be exactly the same as the iron birds in the sky. Is that so? They are the fire of heaven. At that time, the article used the words, a historic moment for mankind. She did not pay much attention to it. After all, she had seen such boastful words too many times. But now, Farina realized that even if those words were 10 times more exaggerated, they would not be able to describe her feelings at the moment. There was lamentation, regret, ridicule, excitement, but most of all, pride. Because she was also a member of mankind. And pride. How much had he missed out on when he had been hiding in Charles' house for the past year? Farina's body trembled slightly, and her hands tightened on the steering wheel. Although she had missed a lot, it was good that she had turned around, wasn't it? Sylvie clearly saw that the demons in the sky were on the verge of collapsing. Under the crossfire of the Air Knight, Lightning, and Maggie, the opponents were completely at a disadvantage. Several devil beasts were fleeing backward uncontrollably, and this action was bound to affect their own kind. But at this distance, they might not be able to escape from Lightning's subsequent pursuit. As for the demons that were pouncing on the convoy, they did not gain any advantage. Based on past experience, a dozen mad demons jumped off the back of their mounts when the devil beasts flew past the convoy, hoping to avoid the advantage of the machine guns. However, they were facing a group of God's punishment witches who were comparable to extraordinaries, and these witches were also holding 40mm shotguns. Their fates could be described as horrendous. Seeing the God's punishment witches tearing the enemies into pieces while laughing maniacally, even Sylvie could not help but close her eyes. At this point, the victory was already a foregone conclusion. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1347. What's the situation like now? Tilly asked. The enemies who intercepted the convoy were almost completely wiped out, and the demons who are still in the sky are fleeing. We should have won, Sylvie replied. It's a pity that I didn't have the chance to perform in the end. Andrea shrugged regretfully. Looks like that senior demon lord was badly injured. Seagull did not participate in the battle. Instead, it hovered in the clouds, guarding against the possible appearance of Haxord or other senior demons. After all, the most effective way to deal with these demons with strange abilities was still Andrea's close-range sniping. Unlike her dispirited companions, Sylvie heaved a sigh of relief. She knew that this counterattack was not the same as the ambush against Sky Lord. The reason why the enemy could not detect the existence of Seagull was because she was not on the plane at that time. Changes in the situation on the battlefield were transmitted through the sigil of listening. Even if she was constantly exposed to the vigilant eye demons, Seagull would still disappear without a trace. But this time, as they had to fight far away from the camp, she had to follow Seagull in order to command the overall situation. It was also for this reason that if Sky Lord appeared with a new vigilant eye demon, Seagull would also be discovered by them. In other words, only when Haxord or other senior demons appeared alone could her attack achieve an unexpected effect. Otherwise, it would be hard to predict how the battle would develop later on if he missed his target. Hence, it was a good thing that they did not appear. After all, there was nothing more worth celebrating than successfully completing a mission and returning safely at the same time. It's better if you don't take action. If Haxord really comes, I don't think the convoy will be able to escape unscathed. Tilly shook her head helplessly. I'm guessing that when Edith came up with this plan, she was probably betting that the freely moving vigilant eye demons are not something that can be immediately replenished. That's why Sky Lord did not dare to act rashly. These words were practically what Sylvie was thinking. She could not help but nod. As expected of the Princess Royal. Oh. Tilly drilled out of the clouds. Now that we've already won, let's confirm the result of the battle before leaving. Sylvie was experienced in this kind of thing. Without the obstruction of obstacles, she only needed to use a little magic power to complete a rough survey of the battlefield. However, the moment she came to this conclusion, she could not help but be stunned. 1,000? No, close to 3,000. 3,000? Vendi was surprised. How can there be so many? Those mad demons. Sylvie looked at the hillside and took a deep breath. They weren't coming for the convoy. They were fleeing in all directions. Only then did she notice the densely packed holes on the top of the mountain. Apparently, in order to reduce the consumption of fog, most of the enemies had burrowed into the ground and would only be awakened when there was a need to fight. But when the fortress monstrous beasts collapsed, the red mist that had lost its source of supply quickly dissipated, and these demons faced a disaster. They did not swarm out to eliminate the attackers, but because they sensed the dissipation of the fog. Driven by their instincts, they burrowed out of their hiding places and ran down the mountain, hoping to reach the next red mist supply point before they ran out of breath. But whether it was Fine Sand City or Sedimentation Bay, they were too far away. The world that had dissipated from the red mist became clean and clear again, but to the demons, it was an uninhabitable land of death. They did not run far before falling to the ground one after another, spreading out evenly at the foot of the hillside. Apart from a few mad demons who were equipped with gas tanks, most of them were silent. The general staff's judgment on this point was undoubtedly correct. Just like how Grey Castle could not equip every soldier with a god's stone of retaliation, the enemy could not distribute the gas tanks and breathing devices to every mad demon. After mobilizing the fully equipped army to attack the human cities, only the troops that were originally active in the Red Mist area were left to guard this place. If it had been 2 days later, the situation might have been completely different. Even if they recruited drivers from outside the army, they still managed to launch a counterattack the day after the first army retreated from Sedimentation Bay. It had to be said that this decision was extremely decisive. I think that the title of Pearl of the Northern Region will spread throughout the 4 kingdoms after this battle. Tilly curled her lips. With a team of less than 100 people, they had annihilated nearly 3,000 enemies. They had only lost 1 steam truck and 2 fires of heaven, and there were no casualties among the combatants. This successful counterattack had boosted the morale of the First Army's headquarters, and even their voices when reporting work had become much louder. But Edith did not show any satisfaction because of this. Almost on the same day that the news of victory reached Cage Mountain, she threw out the next step of the battle plan. The plan immediately received the approval of the Commander-in-Chief, Iron Axe. The convoy was even on the way back when they received the order to turn to Cage Mountain's West Pass. The truck carrying pure water for the Magic Cube met up with them halfway, and after rehydrating the entire team, they joined the convoy and drove west together. The Air Knight returned to Thorntown, and after a short preparation he took off again and arrived at Cage Mountain Airport before nightfall. At noon the next day, the convoy, which had been on the move for an entire day, entered the western border of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. As it was more difficult to avoid the potholes and other obstacles on the road at night, 3 more steam trucks were damaged along the way, and the remaining trucks were thrown into an attack on another fortress-like monstrous beast without stopping. Even though the demons had already realized that the humans had designs on these moving obelisks, they did not expect that in just a day and a half, the counterattack team had already completed the transfer across the Kingdom of Wolfheart. The other fortress-like monstrous beast had just retreated into Gust Castle, and in the absence of external protection, the convoy withstood the attacks of a few patrolling devil beasts and approached within 10 kilometers, where they lowered 4 Longsong cannons. The Air Knight once again played the role of a hunter. With the tacit cooperation of Sylvie and Tilly, this group of rookies, who had only been on the battlefield for less than half a year, had almost replicated the process of the previous battle. Taking advantage of the fact that the enemy's aerial forces had made the cannons their primary target, they swooped down from above and instantly broke up the enemy's formation. The monstrous beasts were blasted to smithereens by the cannons, and facing the convoy guarded by the gods' punishment witches, the small number of mad demons did not have the ability to hold them back even if they got close. On the 3rd day, the enemy finally began to expand the defensive perimeter of the 4 cities, and sent people to destroy the simple hardened roads between the cities. However, the entire battle line was hundreds of kilometers long, and it was almost impossible to ensure that not even a drop of water could leak through. That day, the steam trucks drove through an area dozens of kilometers away from Fine Sand City, attracting the attention of the demons. 25 fires of heaven went around the towering impassable mountain range according to plan, and directly charged into the rear of the Metalstone Ridge to strafe the supply line that transported the red mist. It was also at this time that the effects of the 2 consecutive aerial battles and the overly long battle line on the demons gradually became apparent. By the time they had gathered enough devil beasts to rush to the scene, the air knight had already disappeared into the cold, howling sky. Chapter 1348. In the following 2 weeks, the battlefield in the kingdom of Wolfheart was in a strange stalemate. The demons who had conquered the 4 cities should have built a new batch of mist storage towers in preparation for conquering the kingdom of Wolfheart and then the kingdom of Dawn. But the reality was that the first army's mobile attack had been thwarted. Except for the sedimentation bay by the sea, the other 3 cities had not been able to build any mist storage towers. After being attacked by the Sky Knight, the nobles who were responsible for transporting the red mist wavered. This forced the demons to transfer some troops to supervise and control the normal operation of the bloodline. Coupled with the expansion of the defensive line, the shortage of manpower became more and more obvious. The First Army thought that firing cannons was a good deal, so they did not insist on attacking the 4 cities. The demons patrolling the outermost part of the defensive line were also their hunting targets. Several steam-powered trucks quickly arrived at the preset position, put down the longsong cannons, and fired 2 rounds at the place where the demons were gathered. Then they loaded the trucks and retreated. This kind of small-scale battle happens several times a day. Under the pincer attack of the biplanes and artillery, the demons did not just passively defend. They had organized many attacks. Even when the vanguard attacked the Cage Mountain, they organized a mixed team of humans and demons to take the opportunity to destroy the roads near the Cage Mountain, using black gunpowder in the process. But at this time, the main artery between the north and the south had been connected, and cement produced by the Kingdom of Dawn could be transferred to the front at any time. The simple roads destroyed by the explosions were often repaired by Lotus and the engineering team overnight. Although the low temperature and snowstorm greatly lengthened the solidification time of the cement, it was ultimately just a matter of cost-effectiveness. If the stabilized gravel surface was crushed, they could just repair it. After the main artery project was completed, a large number of idle construction teams gathered in the Cage Mountain area. The First Army did not lack manpower in this area. As the seesaw battle continued, the demons' attacks became slower and slower. They completely lost the momentum they had at the beginning, and the front lines of both sides temporarily froze. "My lord," Haxord raised his head and looked at Siasses, who seemed to want to say something but then slowly closed his eyes. "Speak." From Siasses' expression, it was definitely not good news. However, there had been too much bad news recently, and it was no longer in the mood to express its anger and disappointment. Todalok personally led a team to attack the humans' command post at Cage Mountain. In the end, he died heroically on the front lines. Siasses lowered his head. He fulfilled his promise. It fulfilled its promise, but it did not complete its mission. Haxord didn't have much of a reaction to this long-expected result. It did not even want to ask about the specific circumstances of the death of its subordinates. When fighting against the Union, the death of every higher ascendant meant that the challenger had a powerful background, so it was necessary to collect information. However, if they were to fight against the humans of today, they would be killed by those strange firearms if they were not careful. It could totally imagine what would happen to its subordinates in the end. The fact that Todalok was personally leading the army meant that this was the last fighting unit of the Western Front Army. It had obtained glory, but it was meaningless to its race. If not for the fact that this subordinate was transformed from a Lord of Hell and was only good at charging and breaking through enemy lines and not good at manipulating magic stones, it would have been better to transform him into a high-level parasitic eye demon instead of being killed by the human's firearms. However, it was impossible for Sky Lord to say these words in front of another subordinate. Furthermore, the current situation was not Todalok's problem alone. No matter how brave and intelligent a general was, without sufficient troops, it would be difficult for him to be of much use. He was the one who ordered the attack, and the one who limited the numbers of the Western Front Army was the king. No, that's not right. The king had already given him enough support. The most hateful ones were Blood Conqueror and Mask. If the former could transfer more horns, and if the latter could follow the agreement and provide enough symbiotic demons, the result should be completely different. Hacksword couldn't help but clench his new hand that was already growing flesh. But would it really be completely different? The next moment, a lingering thought appeared in his mind. The Western Front army could indeed occupy the entire kingdom of Wolfheart if they doubled their numbers, but there was still the kingdom of Dawn and Grey Castle. How many more people did he need? All of them? Sky Lord blurted out. My lord? Siases asked, puzzled. What did you say? Nothing. He shook his head. That's right, Osrook had already given him the answer. Give up the cities where the gods' stone mines have been mined, give half of the land to the Sky Sea realm, and then put all the troops into the Land of Dawn. Not 10 times the current plan, but all of them, including the existing and new ones, will advance wave after wave until the human race is extinct. This was the conclusion of the subordinate he valued the most. Back then, all the senior lords thought that it was an unrealistic idea, but now it seemed that he could somewhat understand Osrook's thoughts. After hesitating for a long time, Hacksword made up his mind. He took a deep look at the motionless Nightmare Lord, got up, and walked out of the red mist pond. My lord, where are you going? The top of the birth tower, Sky Lord said in a deep voice. I'm going to request the king to convene a holy sea meeting. The churning sea of mist and the birth tower in the center of the tower, which was filled with giant eyes, gradually appeared before his eyes. Seeing this scene, he heaved a sigh of relief. The Holy Sea meeting was usually called by the king. Not only did such an action cross the line, it would also incur the displeasure of the other senior lords. After all, not everyone was willing to enter the realm of mind where the king controlled everything. If it were in the past, Hacksword would also have instinctively resisted entering the presiding Holy See, but now he had no better choice. This was the only way he could convey his thoughts to the king and the other senior lords. Fortunately, the king did not reject his request. About a quarter of an hour later, the other senior lords appeared on the suspended seats one after another. It's you again, Hacksword, Blood Conqueror said in a low voice. I don't know what's there to discuss about the Western Front that requires the king to convene the Holy See. Don't tell me that what you're going to report is more important than the Nightmare Lord getting lost in the realm of mind? That's right. When Valkyries lost consciousness, you only reported to the king alone, Mask echoed. Now you're calling for a Holy Sea meeting as if it's something important. Don't tell everyone that your Sky City is about to be conquered by those worms. It wasn't easy for me to allocate a large amount of resources to nurture symbiotic demons for you. This guy was beating around the bush to shirk his responsibility again. Hacksword glanced at him coldly. The promised 5 times the number of symbiotic demons had only been delivered so far. Although the Sky Sea Realm's offensive had intensified, it was also a fact that they did not reach the agreed number. If it were in the past, he would definitely not miss this opportunity to attack the other party. But now, Hacksword did not even have the slightest interest in arguing. Enough. The king's voice sounded in everyone's mind. I believe that Sky Lord has his reasons for requesting for a Holy Sea meeting. It won't be too late for you to express your opinions after listening to it. Also, the eyes on the birth tower turned to look at Hacksword. The Nightmare Lord's loss isn't your fault. I have also agreed to send Silent Disaster to assist you in battle. Therefore, I hope that your report won't be filled with platitudes like complaining and asking for more troops. Otherwise, it will just be a waste of time. Hacksword immediately felt a great deal of pressure. He swallowed his saliva and braced himself to reply. Your Majesty, what I wish to discuss is indeed the situation of the Western Front's assistance. But it isn't just 1 or 2 troops or more horns, but... Sky Lord paused and looked into the king's bottomless eyes. The deity of gods. Chapter 1349. The deity of gods was the greatest masterpiece after the race's advancement. It took nearly 100 years and countless resources to finally achieve this miracle. It was seen as a huge leap in the race's control over magic power, and the only way to destroy the Sky-Sea realm. The moment he said that, the Holy Sea fell into a brief and strange silence. For a moment, Hacksword wanted to take back his words, but when he thought about how the battle might end up in the most terrifying way, he held back his impulse. He had to take responsibility for the continuation of the race. After a moment, the king's monotonous voice sounded again. I remember we discussed this previously. You should know what the deity of gods means to our race. The hope of defeating the Sky-Sea realm. Sky Lord nodded. But that's all. What do you mean by that? Blood Conqueror finally could not hold it in and growled. Let's not talk about the fact that we can use it to counterattack the Sky-Sea realm after removing the restrictions on the floating monsters. Even if we use it on the Eastern Front, it will greatly reduce the pressure on the defensive line. And this means the lives and deaths of millions of our people and millions of warriors. You say it's all there is to it? First, your genius subordinate requested for the race to go all out, and now you want to deploy the deity of gods to deal with the insects. You sure are telepathic. Mask sneered as he looked at the people in the Holy See. I wonder what your thoughts are? Forgive me for not agreeing, Loathsome Heart said curtly. The other senior lords also expressed their disapproval. Only Silent Disaster remained silent. Hacksword had a premonition of such a situation. He knew that the matter was too important, and it was impossible to inform the king alone. This was also the reason why he decided to convene a Holy See meeting. If they could not reach a consensus, everything he did would be meaningless. The humans were now extremely similar to them after the first battle of divine will. Through the absorption of legacies, the race obtained unimaginable improvements. All sorts of new magic power technologies spouted out, and every few decades, there would be a huge revolution. The rate of advancement greatly increased, and junior demons were no longer rare. The development of symbiotic demons allowed some inferior magicless demons to become warriors, and the use of magic stones also became common in that period. These results were also reflected in the Second Battle of Divine Will. Even though the Sky-Sea realm had been upgraded as well, it still took them less than 30 years to drive the humans out of the Land of Dawn. Now, fate seemed to be standing on the side of humans. Moreover, their speed of change was even faster than the race at that time. According to the nobles who surrendered, Grey Castle was no different from other kingdoms 10 years ago. The current king of Grey Castle, the fourth prince of the Wimbledon family, was not even worth mentioning. Thus, any hesitation or procrastination would only make the enemy stronger. It had to make everyone aware of that. The Western Front has been defeated. Hacksword took a deep breath. It could imagine what kind of expression Blood Conqueror and Mask would have on their faces. But for the future of its race, it had put its personal gains and losses aside. Although our race still occupies the territories of the two human kingdoms, we no longer have the strength to push forward. The stalemate means that it will be difficult for us to get the legacy shard in a short time, which is no different from failure. What did you say? Mask was surprised. That is an army of more than 100,000, not to mention the symbiotic demons. How could we lose to those worms? Are you lying to the king? Blood Conqueror opened its bloody mouth at the Sky Lord. Not long ago, you said that the Western Front was progressing smoothly, and that our race had successfully stepped onto human land. With the territory covered by the life floater, you are now telling me that we cannot defeat the worms? What a joke! Osrook once gave me a warning, but I did not take it seriously enough, just like how you are treating my warning now, it said slowly. After all, words cannot describe everything that happened on the Western Front. If you want to understand this, you should use your own eyes to see. Then, Hacksword lowered its head to the king. Letting the king read its memory was something it had never wanted to do before. But now that it had taken this step, it had no other choice. As for those small, unintentional mistakes, the king should not take it to heart. The eyes on the birth tower opened at the same time, and a cold feeling surged into its mind. Hacksword forced itself to open up its consciousness, and silently recited its absolute loyalty to the king, allowing the undercurrent to flow through its body. The iron birds flying in the air, the rain of fire falling from the sky, the huge and bright fireballs, and the god's stone crossbow bolts shooting from afar. These scenes appeared one after another, as though it was reliving the battle with the humans. After the cold feeling disappeared, the faces of the lords became unusually ugly. Hacksword knew that they were the same as him. They had personally tasted the feeling of being ambushed by the humans and being only a step away from death. Even the surging sea of fog beneath their feet had become much more agitated. Even though Osruk had previously reported the changes in the humans' weapons of war, no words could compare to experiencing it personally. There were no transcendence or magic power instruments. Just a group of magicless people piloting strange metal constructs, with the cooperation of a few witches, was enough to threaten the lives of the lords. Is that really something that the worms can create? Mask said in disbelief. I can't sense any presence of magic power on it. In fact, that is their unique characteristic. Hacksword knew that his only chance had arrived. The strength of the humans cannot be measured by the scarce number of witches, but all the magicless people should be included. Furthermore, with these things, the originally weak magicless people are no weaker than primal demons in terms of combat power, and can even pose a threat to junior demons and high ascendants. So, what are you trying to say? I want to ask everyone, even if you use the deity of gods, do you have the confidence to conquer the Sky-Sea realm within 10 years? The answer was undoubtedly no. The deity of gods was a necessary counterattack, but it was not the only condition for victory. The Sky-Sea realm was also an upgraded race, and no one could say for sure how much power they could unleash in their own territory. The original strategy was to defend the Blackstone region while devouring the legacy shards of the humans, allowing the race to reach a new level before using the deity of gods to destroy the Sky-Sea realm in one fell swoop. It doesn't matter even if I'm to blame, but the failure of the Western Front is a foregone conclusion. This is an unavoidable fact. Hacksword raised his voice. If we don't seek for change, not only will we not be able to counterattack the Sky-Sea realm in 10 years, we might not even be able to win against the humans. The final outcome will be the complete annihilation of our race with enemies on both sides. Is the deity of gods more important than that? That's just your own judgment, Blood Conqueror gritted his teeth. Of course not. Don't tell me you want to mention Osruk again? Sky Lord paused for a moment. I'm referring to Nightmare Lord. Since he had made up his mind, the small deception was for the sake of loyalty. At this point in time, he could no longer turn back. I'm not sure what clues Valkyries discovered in the realm of mind that caused him to abandon the front lines and choose to take the risk. But before he entered the realm of mind for the last time, Valkyries personally told me that he was leaning towards Silent Disaster's conjecture, that the humans had probably obtained some sort of legacy. Blood Conqueror froze in his seat. The one-sided situation in the Holy See had been stirred. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1350. Valkyries was one of the first to become a senior lord, so the weight of his words was naturally different. Only he was able to maintain a normal tone and attitude when speaking to the king, as though there was no difference between the two. More importantly, the king had never expressed any objections, which was sufficient to explain the problem. If it was the conclusion of the Nightmare Lord, it would naturally have a certain degree of persuasiveness. Furthermore, Hacksword had indeed discussed the possibility of human inheritance with the Nightmare Lord. Apart from not saying it personally, it was a reasonable inference. At the same time, he kept an eye out and deliberately placed the matter after displaying the memories of the Western Front. Perhaps the king would verify this theory while reading his memories, but it was unlikely that he would conduct a special investigation. The Bai King's consciousness was highly autonomous, and his judgment would only be based on facts. The purpose of these words was to shut the mouths of his opponents. Blood Conqueror's pitiful brain was unable to see the situation clearly and could only respond instinctively. In order to shirk the responsibility, Mask would definitely not stand on his side easily. The other senior lords were basically wavering, and it was simply a joke to entrust the future of the race to them. As such, Hacksword spoke this small lie confidently and without any pressure. Backing down now would be the greatest irresponsibility to the race. He had to personally reverse the entire situation. What unknown inheritance? That's too unbelievable. Mask questioned softly. We have all seen the scene in The Origin of Magic Hall. If the race truly exists, then where is it located? Who can guarantee that the conclusion the race came up with is definitely correct? Hacksword vowed solemnly. I also do not wish to believe that humans can obtain the favor of fate, but their transformation is right in front of us. Don't forget, before obtaining the inheritance of the underground civilization, we similarly did not know that the fragments could be separated. You mean, abominations seem to have thought of something. No, I don't mean anything. My only goal is to guide you towards the self-constructed answer. Among the many ruins, if there is a fragment left behind, all the senior lords could not help but fall into deep thought. Except for Blood Conqueror. So what? I absolutely do not agree to use the deity of gods to deal with the lowlifes. The Sky Sea Realms offensive is still increasing. Now that we finally have the chance to catch a breather, we should take the opportunity to consolidate our defensive line. Without the deity of gods, the Eastern Front will not be able to withstand the continuous intense battles. Once the army is defeated, more than 10 cities will be exposed to the enemy's claws. But this time, no one agreed with him. Compared to a dozen or so cities, the future of your race should be your priority. Hacksword glanced at him expressionlessly, then looked at the birth tower in the middle of the Holy See. My respected king, losing the deity of gods on the Western Front will indeed worsen our current disadvantage, but at least it will not lead to the worst outcome. Now, time is not on our side. Humans are quickly absorbing the inheritance they have obtained. Since sacrifices are unavoidable, the next choice is the most important. Hacksword, that's my army. Blood Conqueror roared. Sky Lord turned a deaf ear to him. Everyone has seen for yourself how intricate the war weapons created by humans are. More importantly, the primal demons can use them as well. If our race can absorb their inheritance and use the Fire Rain and Iron Bird on our army, we will be able to reverse the situation of the Sky Sea realm. Even if we lose the entire Blackstone region, the final victor of the Battle of Divine will be us. Upon hearing about the fusion of new weapons, Mask's empty eye sockets blossomed with a flicker of excitement. The Blood Conqueror was furious. And these losses could have been avoided. Enough. The king finally spoke. I understand what you mean. Hacksword's heart was at ease. The king would not be affected by their dispute and would only make a decision based on the actual situation. The other senior lords gradually became skeptical and at least no longer opposed his proposal. This way, the consensus passed at the meeting could be quickly implemented. Otherwise, the dispute and shirking between the senior lords would waste a lot of precious time, and the pressure that the Western Front had exerted on the humans would be reduced to nothing in the indecisiveness. Although this was still a distance from the all-out that Osruk advocated, it was the best outcome that he could fight for. Furthermore, as the greatest masterpiece of the race, the deity of gods had a large number of troops protecting it, which was also a disguised form of support for the Western Front. When this ultimate weapon reached the Land of Dawn, all of the humans' tactics would lose their meaning. The Silent Disasters arrangements remain unchanged, continue to reinforce the Western Front. The king's calm voice echoed in the Holy See. Once the deity of gods is completed, set off for the human territory to seize the Legacy Shard. Shrink the Eastern Front to the south, and if necessary, give up a portion of the cities to reduce the losses of the inferior demons. Before the offensive and defensive situation reverses, they are also important resources. Understood. All the senior lords acknowledged the order. But Blood Conqueror is right. Delaying the Sky Sea realm in the east and devouring the humans in the west is the established strategy for the third battle of Divine Will. Now that we have no choice but to mobilize the deity of gods to the Western Front, it will cause the casualties of the Eastern Front to increase greatly. Sky Lord, do you feel that you are not responsible at all? In that instant, Hacksword felt an extremely cold chill crawl up his spine. In his field of vision, the eyes on the birth tower had all closed together, forming a gigantic eyeball. Compared to it, he was insignificant. Just the pupil alone was enough to contain several of him. The eyeball hung in the air and stared coldly at Haxord, as though it could crush him into powder if it rolled slightly forward. Under such pressure, he could not even muster up the thought of opening the distortion door. In the presiding Holy See, the king was no different from a god. Although your abilities are important, it does not mean that I will overlook this point. This is the last accident of the Western Front plan. Do not disappoint me again, or else. He did not need to use loud words to express his displeasure. The oppressive feeling that seemed to be tangible had already revealed everything. I understand. The eyeball suddenly disappeared, along with the Holy See. The spire of the Sky City and the fog once again appeared in front of Haxord. My lord, are you all right? I'm fine. Looking at Siasis, who was standing guard beside him, Sky Lord shook his head slowly. He originally thought that he was prepared to endure everything, but when faced with the king's malice, the discomfort and resistance that surged up in his heart overwhelmed his expectations. These were just spontaneous reactions. Haxord closed his eyes. Everything was for the sake of the race. He had already done his best. Chapter 1351. Grey Castle, City of Neverwinter. Roland could not help but clench his fists after reading the reports sent back from the front line. What's wrong, Your Majesty? Nightingale, who was beside him, noticed his unusual behavior. No. Nothing. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. Everyone's performance exceeded my expectations. I'm just happy. Really? Nightingale was startled and then smiled. It seems that they're all working hard. That's right. Roland got up, poured 2 cups of chaos drinks, and handed 1 cup to Nightingale. They're really working hard. This was not a casual remark, but his true thoughts at the moment. If he had not been here in person, it would have been difficult for him to connect the current First Army with the frontier guards who used to hold wooden spears. The 8 days of high-intensity combat, the strategic retreat that still maintained the formation, the cover and cooperation of the air and ground combat, and the determination to actively seek the key to victory on the battlefield all proved how amazing the army's growth was. In addition, the strong cooperation of the Kingdom of Dawn and the willingness of the migrants to stay behind to help the army logistics also showed him the overall transformation of the human race. And what surprised Roland the most was Edith. Although many of her previous actions had already shown that she was extraordinary, this surprise could be said to be more than all the previous ones combined. Using the powerful carrying capacity of the steam-powered trucks, they carried out mobile warfare in the territory of the Kingdom of Wolfheart and fully exerted the long-range and powerful characteristics of the fortress cannons, which vaguely resembled the style of the Battle of Lightning. Not to mention the initiative to evacuate the city, causing the enemy's stretched defense line to be full of loopholes, and then the high-mobility troops to attack the enemy's weak points. The First Army could eliminate a large number of effective forces of the demons with such a small cost and stop their advance 200 to 300 kilometers outside the Red Mist area. The contribution of the Chief of Staff was undoubtedly the most remarkable one. Although Roland had talked with the Pearl of the Northern region about their views on the future form of war and the evolution of the war situation with mechanical equipment, they did not talk about the specific types of equipment. The armored vehicles that he had high hopes for were still in the factory in the form of tractors. The fact that Edith was able to link it to a truck meant that her foresight was definitely ahead of the times. It was the combination of individual and collective strength that gave them this hard-won victory. The demons' actions were now firmly restrained, while the First Army's new soldiers and supplies were continuously being transported to the front line through the main artery. The strength of the two sides had become one of them losing, while the other gaining. When the accumulation reached its peak, the real counterattack would begin. Roland and Nightingale clinked their glasses lightly. At this moment, the power of humans seemed to be shining brightly. After finishing his drink, he returned to his desk. According to the usual practice of the First Army, the good news was followed by all kinds of problems. These were problems that only he could solve. For example, Along with high-intensity maneuvers came heart-wrenching losses. The report placed this point at the top of the list. Due to the uncertainty of the battlefield, the longer the crew stayed around the faulty vehicle, the greater the risk. In a situation where they lacked tools and a repair environment, the two of them could at most deal with simple faults such as flat tires and water leaks. When it came to the suspension and transmission system, which were relatively easy to have problems, they were almost helpless. Therefore, after most of the steam-powered trucks broke down, they could only unload the Rubik's Cube and leave. Since the demons launched an all-out attack, the front line had lost as many as 15 trucks. If it was not for the need to maintain the operation of the north-south artery, Roland suspected that Edith would transfer all the vehicles to the kingdom of Wolfheart. To improve this situation, the First Army not only needed a specialized support unit, but also needed to establish relevant repair and maintenance sites, just like the Air Knight. Field repair vehicles and trailers were undoubtedly also necessities to be included in the production schedule. Once again, he clearly felt that if he wanted to use these large machines on the battlefield, it was not as simple as just building them. The resources and money they consumed were simply not something a vassal kingdom could afford. In addition to applying for more steam-powered trucks, the higher-ups of the army also expressed a strong desire for 75mm field cannons and general-purpose machine guns. Various statistics showed that their addition would greatly improve the firepower of the First Army. If it was not for the large consumption of ammunition, they would almost be a perfect weapon. Roland was extremely moved by this conclusion of seemingly flattering but actually demanding money. He then approved the army's application. At the end of the report, there was a handwritten letter from Tilly. He guessed that the contents were similar to the military's, either pressing for a special plane or requesting for more fire of heaven. "Brother, long time no see. You haven't forgotten what you promised me, have you? Now that the demons' offensive is gradually weakening, we should be able to get through this year's months of demons safely. I will take some time to return to Neverwinter and hope to see its true form." As expected, Roland could not help but hold his forehead. He knew it would be like this. Fortunately, the overall structure of the special plane was already in place, and he indeed needed Tilly to verify the feasibility of the new body. However, what she said next was very different from what he had expected. Tilly used a large amount of space to describe in detail the shortcomings of the fire of heaven in actual combat. She even suggested that the production of the fire of heaven should be temporarily stopped until improvements were completed. The biggest problem lay in the twin seats. After summarizing all the available night summary and battle results, she found that out of the 65 devil beasts that could be confirmed to have been shot down, only one came from the backseat shooter. The reason was also very obvious. In close combat, the enemy did not need to bite the tail for a long time like the biplane. The Mad Demon's spear throwing was equivalent to a ballista with an elevation angle of -90 to 90 degrees, covering 270 degrees in front of it. As long as the distance was sufficient, it could completely attack from the top and belly of the fire of heaven. In fact, they often drilled into these blind spots, leaving the backseat shooter helpless. Even if the enemy was within the firing range of the machine gun, it was difficult for the shooter to determine the relative distance of the target in the air without any reference. In addition, it was impossible to predict the flight path of the plane, so the hit rate beyond 100 meters was pitifully low. Most of the time, the shooter would return after firing all the bullets without hitting a single enemy. Similarly, when the fire of heaven strafed targets on the ground, the back seat could only find a small window of opportunity to shoot when it was pulled up. However, the weight of the passengers, weapons, ammunition, and cockpit protection was real. At the same time, in order to adapt to flying, the two people in the front and back had to complete a full set of piloting training. This also made the backseat machine gun an extremely cheap decoration. Tilly bluntly mentioned in the letter that it was more like a design error. If the rear cockpit was removed, not only would the number of night immediately double, the weight saved could also be used in other areas. For example, more fuel. For example, a small bomb. In short, even if there was no way to immediately produce the improved fire of heaven, they had to at least cover the back seat with a skin. Roland could not help but smile bitterly after closing the letter. He could completely imagine Tilly's appearance when she complained. Although he felt helpless at the wantonly criticism of his design, compared to the reference materials in the dream world, the former's actual combat summary was obviously more worthy of being treated. Just as he was about to dig out the previous blueprints of the Fire of Heaven to make changes, the phone with the administrative office label rang. Roland picked up the receiver, and Barov's excited voice came from the other side. "Your Majesty, your Iron Tower project is completed." Chapter 1352. Let go of that which has just returned from Beijing. I'm on leave today. Currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 1353. Is that so? Roland was overjoyed. Judging from Barov's tone, it was not as simple as the facilities being built. You heard the signal too? The so-called Iron Tower project was the first step of the wireless communication plan. To meet the needs of the huge antenna needed for long-wave communication, the Ministry of Construction had built 50-meter tall towers at North Slope Mountain and Silver City. More than half of the towers were only as thick as an adult's body, so they looked like long, sharp needles from a distance. With the addition of retractable hydrogen balloons dragging metal wires, the antenna could reach a maximum length of more than 100 meters. In terms of construction difficulty, it was not too praiseworthy. However, the communication tower was a systematic project, and the receiving equipment at the bottom of the tower was the key. As the debugging process would inevitably emit electromagnetic waves many times, even if the signal was messy and disorderly, in this world where there was no interference, it was normal for the other side to capture it. Yes, Your Majesty, Barov replied excitedly. It is indeed, as you said, producing some marvelous reaction of its own accord. But I'm not sure if it was caused by Silver City. I think this question will be answered soon. Roland pondered for a moment. Inform the ministers of the administrative office to go together. I don't think they would want to miss this opportunity to witness history. After several years of development, North Slope Mountain was no longer the steep mining area with only a few narrow mountain paths. Wide cement roads and railroad tracks were built along the slope, and it would only take a quarter of an hour to reach the top of the mountain by train. Not far from the Iron Tower was a row of simple red brick single-story houses with a row of icicles hanging from the low eaves. It looked far less imposing than the new factories on the south bank of the Redwater River. Based on its appearance alone, it was difficult to associate it with the new era. Entering the house, Anna was directing the Sand Nation members of the Society of Wondrous Crafts to make the final preparations. When she saw Roland, she secretly made a "everything is ready" gesture and then seriously immersed herself in her work. Roland could not help but grin. As early as when the wireless communication plan was first set, it had caused a heated discussion in the administrative office. Most people could clearly see what kind of change this project would bring to the human world. If the news could be transmitted, it would be a great boost to both the war power and the control of Neverwinter. The wired phones, the flying messengers, and the sigil of listening were proof that the old aristocratic forces in Grey Castle had not found any opportunity to make a comeback. Many officials had thought that centralization of power would be a long and repeated process, but the fact was that they had not been able to make any waves after being overthrown by the First Army. The reason was that in the face of efficient information transmission, the nobles would be annihilated by the Second Army or even the police as soon as they showed the slightest sign of trouble, leaving no room for them to grow. However, the phone had a wire, and the last two were related to magic power, so the officials could somewhat understand it. However, not only did the Iron Tower engineering not have any connections, but its theoretical effect was even stronger than that of a magical creation. This was truly unbelievable. Although there was a basic introduction to electromagnetic waves in primary education textbooks, many people still had doubts about something that could not be seen or touched. In a sense, it was even more unimaginable than a biplane. Of course, this heated discussion would not affect the actual progress of the project. After all, under the guidance of Roland, there were too many miracles in Neverwinter over the years. Even if he suddenly announced that he was going to fly to the Bloody Moon, the administrative office would still go all out. However, wireless communication was not his specialty, so he was not as confident as developing mechanical equipment. This set of transceiver devices was completely copied from the Grey Castle Design Bureau's prototype, so no one knew the actual effect. With Anna's gesture, he finally did not have to worry about losing face in front of the ministers. Then let's begin. Roland took Anna's hand and led her to the transmitter. Roland? This is the result of the Ministry of Engineering. Of course, you're the first tester. He winked at her. Although he already knew in advance that she had confirmed the feasibility of communication during the debugging process, it would definitely be the official test that would be recorded in the history books. There's still a receiving position. Who wants to be the first to experience it? Barav and the others looked at each other and raised their hands. Your Majesty, let me do it. After some scrambling, the old director, with the most profound qualifications, successfully fought his way out of the crowd and became one of the testers for the first long-distance telegram communication. In theory, the transmission and reception of the telegram could be completed by one person, but it was obviously easier to verify the test results by separating them at this time. For people who had never seen a radio before, the most important thing was how to convince them that the other end, hundreds of kilometers away, had really received the message transmitted here. The simplest way was to let the unknowing receiver report the information through the telegram that should only be known by the sender. After Roland briefly explained the test method, he asked the guards to cover Barav's eyes. Anna drew 3 horizontal lines and 2 dots on a small blackboard. The horizontal lines represented long tones, and the dots represented short tones. After everyone confirmed that there was no mistake, she pressed the button of the transmitter. 3 long lines and 2 segments. The moment the circuit was connected, a bright blue light bloomed in the center of the gap between the sparks. As the electric key was not connected to a buzzer, there was no other movement in the house except for this light. Everyone held their breath. This arc of light was so small that it would be difficult to see it standing outside the house, let alone Silver City, which was hundreds of kilometers away. Roland, on the other hand, could not help but have goosebumps. At that moment, he seemed to feel something pass through his body. There was no doubt that it was an illusion. In the case of low power, electromagnetic waves would not have any effect on the human body. But in his mind, everything appeared in a clear and distinguishable image. The electric flames seemed to disappear in a flash, but the transmitted electric current repeatedly oscillated between the inductor and the capacitor as many as tens of millions of times per second. The rapidly changing electric field quickly spread along the antenna and the ground wire, and spread in all directions. It was a human cry in the silent world. No one could hear it, and yet it was louder than any sound that had ever been heard. Even after flying hundreds of kilometers, the wave did not disappear and was accurately recorded by the antenna of Silver City. It was greeted by 2 receivers. After an ancient powder detector caught the electromagnetic wave, the metal powder in the glass tube turned from loose to condensed. This caused the resistance in the circuit to suddenly decrease, and the originally extinguished light bulb bloomed with a soft yellow light. Its biggest function was to inform the listener that the cry was echoing in the sky above the dome. The other was an ore detector. It did not require any external power supply and was always in the receiving state. A piece of galena and a wire inserted into it formed a natural semiconductor. The energy radiated by electromagnetic waves formed a weak electric current inside it. One had to wear headphones to hear the sound. In the absence of a buzzer modulation, it did not produce a clear and melodious beep, but it still accurately reproduced the frequency of the transmission. Then the process was reversed. Distance was no longer a problem, and it was as fast as light could be. In other words, it was light itself. Anna repeated it 3 times before putting down the button. According to the agreement, if Silver City received the transmission, it would send the exact same message. If it was a conventional way of sending a letter, it would take about 5 to 7 days to complete a round trip between the two places. If it was a flying messenger, it would take at least a day. But the moment Anna put down the button, the light on the receiver lit up. It only took a few seconds. The crowd could not help but burst into an uproar. The blindfolded Barav knew nothing about it. He listened for a long time, and finally slowly wrote down the message he heard on a piece of paper. When he took off the headset and blindfold, there was no need to ask about the test results. From the surprised looks of the crowd, the answer was self-evident. The mark on the paper was 3 horizontal lines and 2 dots. Chapter 1354. Your Majesty, can I have a try? Kyle Sichi asked eagerly. Of course. Roland nodded with a smile. You'll be the one to send the message this time. The chief alchemist pondered for a moment and wrote a string of characters of different lengths on the small blackboard. There were more than 20 characters in total. If 3 horizontal lines and 2 dots could be a coincidence, this message basically ruled out the factor of luck. The receiver was still Barav. Obviously, he did not want this extraordinary experience to end so soon. Before Roland could speak, he rushed to put on the blindfold. The jumping electric arcs once again bloomed between the sparks. This time, the old director took a longer time to listen. When he wrote the answer on a piece of paper and showed it to everyone, the crowd finally burst into applause. Although there were 2 mistakes in the more than 20 characters, the number was exactly the same as what Kyle had written. This could not have been a coincidence. In other words, in less than a few seconds, the message had been exchanged between Neverwinter and Silver City. This was the only way to explain how he knew the content of Kyle's message. Your Majesty, how far can the Iron Tower send the message? Barav asked excitedly. As long as we increase the power, it should be able to reach thousands of kilometers. Doesn't that mean it can cover the entire territory of the 4 kingdoms? Hearing this, the crowd could not help but whisper. Not just that. Even the fertile plains are basically included in it. It's incredible that Grey Castle can know what's happening in the kingdom of Everwinter in the next second. Indeed, if I didn't see it with my own eyes, I really wouldn't believe that it's humanly possible. Barav, on the other hand, was already thinking about a deeper problem. Your Majesty, if we give specific meanings to these symbols, we may be able to convey more complicated content, such as instructions and decrees. After witnessing a new technology, the first thing he thought about was how to use it. It had to be said that the old director's knowledge and ideas were much broader than before. Obviously, he had changed a lot in recent years to adapt to his position as the ruler of this new kingdom. Roland smiled approvingly. You're going in the right direction, but you can do it more thoroughly. You mean, instead of assigning specific meanings to symbols, we'll assign specific symbols to existing words. This way, even if we can't hear human voices, we'll be able to communicate in real time. After pondering for a moment, Barav's eyes lit up. Obviously, he also realized the great significance of this new language. Since the language of this world used a completely different phonetic system, the telegraph code of the other world could not be directly applied. But under the same principle, with a little more thought, a suitable set of communication codes could be developed. With these codes, any written information could be converted into corresponding electrical signals and transmitted to all parts of the continent at the speed of light. As for who would create this set of telegraph codes, Roland already had a plan in mind. As the recorder of information from both worlds, no one was more suitable for this task than Scroll. Your Majesty. Sirius Daly, the Minister of Agriculture, raised his hand eagerly. Can I try this telegraph? Of course. Roland looked at the crowd. If any of you are interested, you can try it yourself. The higher-ups of Neverwinter immediately burst into an uproar. They swarmed over and soon surrounded the table where the machine was placed. Seeing this scene, Anna walked to Roland and shook her head in amusement. Of course, Roland understood the meaning behind her smile. The spark transmitter and the ore receiver were just the least technical parts of the wireless communication plan. The former could send out overwhelming messages at all frequencies, while the latter could accept all incoming messages. The two seemed to be a match made in heaven, but it also made it so that only one set of messages could be transmitted in a region at a time. In fact, after the spark transmitter was replaced by the more advanced electronic tube wireless equipment, it still played a role in the field of interference because of its characteristics. In addition, this system required a large skyline and a certain output power, so it was difficult to reduce its size and weight. It was destined to be installed in a few important cities. After the trial production of the electronic tube was completed, the radio and radio stations that could directly transmit sound signals without interfering with each other would usher in the first peak of wireless communication. He did not know how surprised they would be at that time. He knew that this was exactly what Anna was looking forward to. He had to admit that in this aspect, he and Anna had very similar hobbies. Just as everyone was excitedly trying to communicate with Silver City, Roland suddenly felt a strong sense of dizziness. It came so fast that the outline of the things in the room appeared to be double. He subconsciously closed his eyes, trying to suppress the spread of dizziness, but his body seemed to have lost its center of gravity. Anna was the first to notice his abnormality. She reached out and grabbed his arm. "Roland, are you okay?" "I'm fine." Roland wanted to answer, but when he opened his mouth and coughed violently. He covered his mouth, and the sweet smell of blood filled his throat. "Damn it, what's going on?" His eyelids quickly closed as if they were 1,000 pounds heavy. His open palm was stained with bright red spots, and he seemed out of place with everything around him. Although he tried his best to stay awake, his consciousness was quickly fading away. Anna seemed to be shouting at him, but he could not hear anything other than the noisy noise. His body fell backward uncontrollably, and the last thing he saw was Nightingale's figure and the rapidly spreading fog. When Roland opened his eyes, he found himself back in his bedroom in the castle. "His Majesty is awake." Before he could sit up, Scroll's low voice came from beside him. Then there was a burst of hurried footsteps, and in the blink of an eye, Anna appeared at the head of the bed. Obviously, she had been in the room and had not gone too far away from him. "How do you feel?" She leaned over and pressed on his forehead. "Do you feel uncomfortable?" she asked softly. Roland concentrated for a moment. "No. I feel very comfortable all over. I feel that my whole body is very clear, as if I just had a good sleep, and my spirit is much better than usual." Looking at their doubtful gazes, he helplessly spread out his hands and said, "It's absolutely true, except..." "Except what?" Anna and Scroll asked in unison. "Except a little hungry." Roland touched his stomach. "How long have I been asleep?" Anna's expression finally relaxed a lot. "About 6 hours, which is the shortest time you've ever slept. I'll inform the kitchen to prepare a meal." "But, are you really okay?" "I can't be better." Roland shrugged. "By the way, isn't Nightingale here? She'll be able to tell if I'm comforting you or not." As soon as he finished speaking, Nightingale appeared from the shadows. However, she did not approach the bed, nor did she immediately answer. Instead, she remained silent for a long time before nodding. "His Majesty is telling the truth." "See." Roland curled his lips. At this moment he really did not feel any discomfort, and what he said was the truth. However, Nightingale's response was much slower than usual. Although he felt a little strange, he did not delve into it. "As for why I fainted, it's probably because I didn't get enough rest." Genius 1 second to remember this website address. Apex mobile version website. Chapter 1355. This explanation was somewhat far-fetched, but Anna and Scroll could not find any more problems with it. After he woke up, his body temperature, breathing, and pulse were all normal. Even Roland himself felt strange. The dizziness came without warning, as if his consciousness was suddenly cut off. The road from North Slope Mountain to the castle was completely blank. During the examination, he also learned from Scroll what happened after he fainted. Several people heard Anna's cry, but they did not witness the scene of him collapsing. At the moment when Roland lost consciousness, Nightingale pulled both of them into the mist at the same time. Later, Anna came out and explained that it was just a cry of surprise when she almost slipped and fell, so the matter was covered up. As for where His Majesty the King went, no one paid special attention. After all, Nightingale's strength was deeply rooted in everyone's hearts. It was almost impossible to hurt Roland with her. Therefore, as long as she was there, Roland did not need personal guards to accompany him at all times. Besides, the King of Grey Castle did not need to inform them of his whereabouts. Since the radio communication test was a great success, it was very normal for His Majesty to go first. Because of this, only Anna, Scroll, and Nightingale stayed by his side. Even the other members of the Witch Union did not know about it. Hearing this, Roland finally felt relieved. He had to admit that Nightingale had made the best choice at the critical moment. Now that the affairs of Grey Castle were tied to him and there were strong enemies outside, the upper and lower levels had to maintain a high degree of unity in order to fight a bloody path in the battle of divine will. If he collapsed at this time, it would inevitably lead to unstable factors. Even if it was only a temporary coma, people could not help but speculate about his physical condition. The best way to deal with it was to pretend that it had never happened. Thanks to you. Roland smiled at Nightingale. The latter did not take the opportunity to ask for a few chaos drinks like she usually did. Instead, she responded in a low voice, "No, it's nothing. It's good that you're fine." It was only 8 o'clock in the evening when he finished the meal sent by the kitchen. Roland had intended to return to the office to modify the Fire of Heaven's blueprint, but Anna forced him back to bed with the excuse that a patient needed to rest. Helplessly, he had no choice but to do as he was told. He even cancelled his trip to the dream world that night. After all, the sudden coma made him feel a little guilty. Previously, the long hours of overtime had led to the tragedy, so it was not a bad thing to rest for a while. After saying goodnight, the three of them walked out of the room. After the door was closed, the room was immediately shrouded in darkness. Only the faint light of the city outside the window shone on a small piece of glass in the gap between the curtains. After about a quarter of an hour, Roland heard a rustling sound. In this quiet and windless bedroom, the bottom of the velvet curtain swayed slightly. He tilted his head and saw a black shadow appear at the window, blocking the only source of light. The faint light behind him drew out a thin silver line on his silhouette. Such a scene was inexplicably nostalgic. Roland sat up and said without surprise, "Now can you tell me what happened?" The black shadow walked to the window and revealed a head of beautiful curly hair. It was Nightingale. "You knew I would come?" She was startled. "You wouldn't be like this usually." Roland smiled and shook his head. He took out the stone of lighting from the bedside cabinet and placed it in the lamp slot. A gentle yellow light immediately illuminated the entire room. "Your expression just now was as if your thoughts were written all over your face." Then Anna, Nightingale subconsciously covered her face. "I'm guessing she noticed it too? That's why she left me in the bedroom." Roland let out a long sigh. But since she didn't take the initiative to ask, it's equivalent to tacitly agreeing with your judgment of the matter. If you feel that you shouldn't let others know, she probably won't pursue the matter. This was undoubtedly a form of trust. Nightingale's eyes revealed a complicated expression. "To be honest, I'm also very curious." Roland continued, "When I said that I felt comfortable and didn't feel any discomfort, I didn't deliberately make up a lie to comfort you. It was my true feeling. You could clearly hear this, but why did you look so worried at that time? What were you worried about?" She lowered her eyelids and said, "There were more than 3 people who knew that you were unconscious." "More than 3 people? Nana wasn't in Neverwinter, and Lily couldn't heal you. At that time, no one could even determine your condition." Nightingale said slowly, "In a moment of desperation, I thought of someone. Although she couldn't do anything about the specific illness, at least she could make an overall judgment. So I hid it from Anna and took her into the bedroom." "You mean, Momo?" Roland's heart skipped a beat. She was indeed an extremely suitable candidate. The trend of her lifespan itself could explain a lot of problems. Nightingale was undoubtedly much more mature than before to be able to sort out her thoughts and find the right way to deal with such a chaotic situation. However, thinking of her troubled look, he faintly felt that it might not be a good result. What did Momo see? 14. Nightingale stared at him for a long time before replying in a low voice. The number changed from 17 to 14. Shortened by 3 years? Roland could not help but frown. This was a little too strange. If the illness had worsened, there should have been some signs. But now he really felt energetic, not to mention the pain. Nightingale seemed to have guessed what he was thinking. It's not an illness, nor is it fatigue. I've compared the samples of the criminals in the mine, and none of them matched yours. It's obviously not normal to shorten a period of a few months to 3 years. Otherwise, the actual time in these 4 or 5 years is equivalent to a reduction of 30 or 40 years. It can only have started recently. Now that she said it, it was indeed possible. Roland touched his chin and said, "But I haven't encountered anything special recently. No, there's one thing." Nightingale bent down. "Perhaps you haven't noticed it, but I know better than anyone. In the past few months, the number of times you've entered the dream world has increased by several times compared to before. Other than this, I can't think of any other reason." She reached out to hold Roland's hand, and her tone also changed a little. "Promise me, don't enter the dream world again, okay?" "So that's why?" Roland could not help but understand. That's right, the biggest change in the past few months was probably the dream world. The key was not the number of times he entered, but the absorption of the force of nature cores. According to Lon, the dream world would continue to expand due to the growth of magic power until it invaded the realm of God. He did not know what the realm of mind would eventually become, but he could clearly feel the self-enrichment process of a world. And as the creator closely connected to it, it seemed reasonable that the pressure he had to bear had increased significantly. Now that he thought about it, Lan's solemn mention of "time is running out" might not only refer to the will of God, but also his situation. Chapter 1356. "Maybe you're right," Roland said after a moment of silence, "but at this point, the dream world has become the key to guiding the rapid development of Neverwinter. I can't and shouldn't unilaterally close the channel to it. Especially after Scroll had advanced to become a transcendent, the significance of the dream world had become unprecedentedly important. Every time she entered the realm of mind, she could bring immeasurable knowledge to mankind. Moreover, Zero, Garcia, and Defender Rock were also inside. He could no longer treat them as illusions. Even without Lon, Roland wasn't willing to give up the dream world. Nightingale clenched her fists. "What about me?" Roland was taken aback. "What? Then what should I do?" Her voice suddenly rose a notch, and there was a slight tremble in her voice at the end. "If time is shortened like this, in a few years, you will." Nightingale bit her lip, as if she had used all her strength to cut off the second half of the sentence in her throat. "Anna and I made a promise, and I am willing to abide by it. But if I can't wait for that day to come, what should I do?" Roland raised his hand and gently stroked her pale lips. "That's why I need to enter the dream to end everything. Numbers, you know, do not only decrease but never increase. They represent trends, not results. If he could uncover the true nature of the origin of magic, there was a high chance that these negative influences from the realm of mind would disappear. On the contrary, if we just avoid it, it might become even worse at some point. By then, it will be too late to take action. If Lan's warning was true, then God's patience was running out. Any decision to leave hope to time could lead to destruction. The frequent appearance of fallen evils and oracles seemed to prove this point. He had to take the risk. "But I promise I won't let that happen," Roland said seriously. Nightingale stared at him for a long time. "No matter what?" "No matter what." He nodded. The latter did not reply. Her figure gradually faded until it completely disappeared into the fog. Roland put the magic stone into the drawer, and darkness quickly occupied every corner of the room. The faint light on the window returned to its original color, as if nothing had happened. But he knew those were not illusions. He placed his left hand on the side of his body, and the gentle touch never disappeared. Before he fell into a deep sleep. Beep beep, you have an unreceived message. Beep beep, you have an unreceived message. Who is it? Why is he so diligent in sending text messages? Fei Yuhan was arranging her luggage in front of the mirror. Is he someone from the association? You could say that. Vaucries clicked open the mailbox, and then closed it with gritted teeth. If he had not deliberately controlled his strength, the thing in his hand would have been torn apart. Not bad. What do you mean by not bad? That person has good taste. Fei Yuhan smiled as she put on her furry gloves. Didn't you notice that the number of gazes directed at you during the Martialist tournament was second only to mine? But most people only dared to look. To be the first to muster the courage to send you a message is definitely praiseworthy. If you have the time, why don't you introduce me to him? It's not what you think it is, Vaucries replied angrily. After recovering from her injuries and being discharged from the hospital, she and Fei Yuhan stayed in the same building. Their bedrooms were connected to a large living room, and they could clearly hear each other's movements. Vaucries did not have any objections to this, and even felt lucky. After all, in this unfamiliar world, the more people she interacted with, the more likely she would be exposed. Fei Yuhan, who had been taking care of her during her visit, had also helped her a lot. Therefore, her anger was not directed at Fei Yuhan. What annoyed her was the sender. Without a doubt, the small box in her hand, which was called a cell phone, was definitely a magical treasure. Through it, she could search for most of the knowledge she wanted to understand. Compared to those paper books, it was a true encyclopedia. Ever since Fei Yuhan taught her how to use this communication tool, she could no longer put down her cell phone. However, it was not without its flaws. For example, when her number was known by others, it would become extremely annoying. What made her even more unhappy was that she could not easily block the other party. In any case, you don't have to worry about this matter. Vaucries rubbed her forehead. Losing the three-eyed magic stone made her feel like something was missing. Are you going out now? That's right. The association has recently recruited a newcomer. The guardian wants me to meet her. A newcomer? Vaucries raised her eyebrows. She naturally knew that Fei Yuhan's position in the Martialist Association was extraordinary. Receiving a newcomer was not something she needed to do. That's right. After all, I'm going to be her master in the future. Fei Yuhan smiled, waved her hand and walked out the door. Master, for a moment, the transformer appeared in Vaucries' mind. However, this surging emotion only lasted for less than a second before it was interrupted by the ringing of her cell phone. Beep beep, you have an unopened text message. Beep beep, you have an unopened text message. This fellow. She clenched her fists, and after enduring for a long time, she opened her inbox. Sender, Roland. Your invasion forces have been counterattacked by our army at the southern border of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. The front lines have been utterly routed, and there are close to 100,000 casualties. We have also lost quite a few giant skeletons that can produce red mist, and the Sky Lord is nowhere to be seen. Is he scared out of his wits by the cannons? And where are the senior lords? If they don't come, this vanguard army will all be buried in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. Sender, Roland. We have already discovered the Blackstone obelisk at the ridge of the continent. It is only a matter of time before we attack it. What do you think will happen if we throw an incendiary bomb into that huge pit? Although the distance is a little far, we are already in the process of developing an aircraft that can travel long distances. If we do not end the Battle of Divine Will as soon as possible, the same scene will repeat itself until the Blackstone region becomes an inextinguishable volcano. I hope you can understand this point. Sender, Roland. By the way, after being in the dream world for so long, you should understand the heights humans can reach in terms of weaponry, right? And one of the peaks of this mountain, the glory of the sun, has just undergone a theoretical test not long ago and is only one step away from being produced. Do you still want to continue considering? She received several such messages every day. It was either about the front lines or the latest human research results. Previously, Valkyries had remained silent, neither rejecting nor replying to the messages. But this time, after staring at the screen for a long time, she slowly pressed the reply button. Where are you? Let's meet and talk. Forwarded. Where are you? Let's meet and talk. The same message appeared on Fei Yuhan's phone. Not bad. It seems that I will be able to learn more about the other world today. She happily closed the screen and knocked on the door of the defender's office. Come in. The defender's calm voice came from inside. Yes. The moment she pushed open the door, she noticed the slightly nervous young lady sitting by the coffee table with her head lowered. She had a head of soft white hair, was not tall, and did not emit any obvious force of nature. She was not considered outstanding in terms of her awakened foundation. But that was not the main point. After a quick glance, Fei Yuhan returned to her usual taciturn self and nodded at the defender. Your Excellency. You should already know the reason why I called you here. Rock took a sip of tea unhurriedly. Now that she is here, I can't help but ask, why do you want to accept her as your disciple? After all, this is the first time you have taken the initiative to make such a request to the association. Probably to find something to do, she replied indifferently. Rock was slightly stunned, then he clapped his hands and laughed. Pa, that sounds like your style. But no matter what the reason is, it is a good thing for Prism City, which urgently needs to replenish its strength. He looked at the young lady at the side. Let me introduce you. This is Fei Yuhan, a genius martial artist recognized by the association. Although she does not look easy to get close to, she is a serious and responsible person. If she can become your master, it will be of great help to you in the future. And this young lady is a new awakened living in Roland's house, 0. Fei Yuhan extended her hand and said with a smile, Welcome to the Martialist Association. Please remember this book's original domain name. Come to read mobile version. Please remember this book's original domain name. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1357. The meeting place was the same as the last time. Even the seats had not changed much. Valkyries walked into the restaurant and immediately saw Roland sitting by the floor-to-ceiling window. The bustling human city spread under his feet, as if an extension of his figure. This visual difference gave her the illusion that he was sacred and inviolable. She shook her head and threw the distracting thoughts to the back of her mind. I'm here. She sat opposite Roland. Is there anything you want to eat? Roland saw her shake her head and waved for the waiter. If that's the case, then give me one of each. Let's talk while we eat. Coffee and pastries were quickly served, and Valkyries did not refuse. She naturally picked up a piece of peninsula cake and put it in her mouth, carefully tasting its softness and sweetness. It was as if this was not a negotiation with an enemy, but a tea party specially made to enjoy delicious food. You're a little different from before. Roland stared at her. I've thought about it. Talking while eating isn't a bad habit, Valkyries replied unhurriedly. The first time they met, she had been too passive and was almost led around by the nose. But this time, it would not be the same. She could imagine the smug look on his face when he sent her the message. No one could be smug forever, and she had endured it long enough. All right. Roland pouted. You replied this time because you've thought it through? Valkyries nodded. Then what's your answer? I refuse. Then she caught a hint of surprise and confusion on Roland's face. He probably did not expect her to refuse so decisively. Even his usually calm expression showed a slight flaw. The atmosphere between the two seemed to freeze. Roland maintained the posture of holding the cup for a long time before he brought it to his mouth and took a sip. What's the reason? The choice of 0 and 5% does sound reasonable. Compared to the continuation of the race, a vanguard army is nothing. If we want to prevent the destruction of the world, we have to pay a certain price. To be honest, I was almost convinced by you. Valkyries stuffed another piece of cake into her mouth. Unfortunately, all of this has to be based on facts to be meaningful. I'm telling the truth, Roland said in a deep voice. This was the first time his tone had changed. But I can't prove it. Roland suddenly fell silent. You noticed it too, right? I'm trapped in this realm, and all the information I receive from the outside world comes from you. Whether it's the Vanguard army's defeat in the Kingdom of Wolfheart or the so-called glory of the sun, I can't even verify it, let alone make a decision based on this information. I thought you'd be smarter. After being in Dream World for so long, isn't it obvious to judge the war potential of humans based on historical documents? Potential doesn't represent strength, Valkyries retorted. That's right, the power that humans have displayed is indeed very strong, or else Osrook wouldn't have treated you as an equal opponent. But at the same time, most of the race's energy is held up by the Sky-Sea realm. If someone realizes that they can't take care of both sides and have to give up on one side, the humans may not be able to withstand the full blow of my race. She paused. At the end of the day, the advancement you've obtained isn't from the advancement of civilization. A few hundred years later, it might have the same effect as the shard, but I can't determine which direction the situation will take. So from now on, you don't have to send me any more information. Roland seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he couldn't continue the conversation. Valkyries looked out the window, taking in the splendor of the human city. The meeting this time could be said to have vented his anger. The unruffled expression on the other party's face finally dissipated, and was replaced by an obvious sense of disappointment. But she didn't feel the joy that she had expected. The threat of God still existed, and Transformer Heftali's warning had yet to be lifted. If what she said was true, then rejecting her was undoubtedly choosing the hopeless answer between 5% and 0%. But to make her do something detrimental to her race based on a one-sided statement from a human was an even more rash choice. Between the two, she would rather choose the former, even if the decision would bring about great danger. After Valkyries swallowed the last piece of cake, she feigned a relaxed tone. Thank you for your hospitality, I'll miss this taste in the future. If you want to eat, we can arrange another time. Roland shook his head. You don't have to make it sound like it's your last dinner. Valkyries couldn't help but be stunned. She had imagined 100 reactions after the other party's disappointment, including anger, contempt, and a stern warning, but none of them included this. Since she had rejected the suggestion, it wouldn't be surprising if Roland found an opportunity to get rid of her. After all, she was a senior lord, and her race was currently humanity's greatest enemy. I'll head back first. Roland let out a long sigh, stood up, and walked out of the restaurant. I'll continue sending messages. Even if you want to avoid them, that's the truth. This guy, did he even listen to me? Valkyries couldn't help but ask, what do you plan to do next? What do I plan to do? He said without turning his head. My thoughts have never changed. Uncover the secret of the origin of magic and completely end the battle of divine will, no matter what choice you make. Is this a pretense, or is this his true thoughts? Valkyries couldn't help but recall the last question that Roland asked during their last meeting. Do you think that Transformer Heath-Tully's made a mistake 1,000 years ago? What do you think of the Martialist Association? Fei Yuhan asked while holding the steering wheel. The car turned onto the ramp and drove onto the Greenfields Highway Bridge. There weren't many cars on the bridge, and the view was extremely clear. The sparkling, spacious river and the densely packed skyscrapers on the opposite bank stretched along the skyline as if there was no end to it. This bridge was also the dividing line between the city and the suburbs. From the Greenfields Sanatorium to the apartment complex, one had to pass through it. It's a little different from what I imagined. Zero seemed to be more interested in the interior of the car than the scenery in front of her. She pinched the soft leather of the door and touched the rising stereo on the center console. Her ruby-like eyes kept rolling since she got in the car. Oh, then what did you imagine the association to be like? More mysterious, and not like a hotel that's placed on the side of the road. Zero pouted. The Prism City used to be like that, but it recently ran into some trouble, so we can only move here for the time being. Fei Yuhan chuckled. In front of the little girl, she naturally didn't have to pretend to be indifferent to maintain a distance. Also, I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about your personal feelings when you visited the park. After all, if you want to learn to control the force of nature in the future, you'll have to stay in the sanatorium for a long time. If you have any needs in life, you can mention it to Master." The little girl didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her head and asked, "Does Uncle Roland also work here?" "That's right. But he doesn't necessarily have the time to accompany you every day." "I know." Zero curled her lips. "He has many sisters to take care of, and he often works until late at night without stopping to rest." The car suddenly rushed forward. Fei Yuhan retracted her right foot that had stepped on the wrong pedal. She pretended to cough twice. This was really an explosive piece of information. Even though she already knew that those stunning women might have come from another world, she had overlooked a crucial factor, and that was that they had addressed him as His Majesty. That's right, since he was a king, it wasn't hard to understand that he had a large number of wives and concubines. She could even further speculate that they might have an intimate relationship with the creator of this world, Roland, which gave them the ability to enter this world. Taking the initiative to accept Zero as a disciple was indeed the right choice. Through Valkyries and Zero, she believed that it wouldn't be long before she could uncover the secrets of that world bit by bit. If that's the case, doesn't that mean that if I want to go to reality, to take a look, I have to, Master, are you all right?" Zero called out a few times before she was pulled back from her daze. "No, I'm fine." Continue. "That's why I'll have more time to see Uncle only after I become a martialist," Zero concluded. "Then, no matter what the Martialist Association is like, I will continue to stay." Fei Yuhan laughed involuntarily. "All right, it's really a simple reason. Simple but firm." She originally thought that the little girl would need a long time to adapt to leaving her familiar residence, but now she realized that she had been overthinking. She was far more mature than she had imagined. "Don't worry, it will take at least a week for the transfer and check-in procedures to be completed. Furthermore, there are holidays in the association, so you don't have to think that the path of a martialist is too difficult. When we return this time, we should properly say goodbye to our classmates." Halfway through her words, Fei Yuhan suddenly noticed something strange. A cargo truck on the opposite lane swerved left into two lanes, slammed into the median, and flipped over. She immediately stepped on the brakes and swerved to the right. However, in the next second, a huge cargo truck crashed through the median and swept over like a tall wall. The road was completely sealed off, and the cars in front that had been hit were shredded like pieces of paper. There was no possibility of survival. Everything happened too quickly, leaving almost no time to react. With a loud bang, the car that the two were in also collided with the heavy truck. Due to the sudden swerve to the right, the car was sent flying horizontally. The violent impact immediately tore the car's frame apart, and the driver's seat was completely dented. Chapter 1358. When Zero crawled out of the broken window, her body was covered with scars. The car, which had been as shiny as new a moment ago, was now no different from a ball of rags. The twisted steel frame was almost twisted, and the body of the car had shrunk to half its original size. Yellow and black engine oil seeped out of the ground, giving off a pungent smell. This should have been a fatal car accident. Without the protection of the force of nature, she would have been twisted into a bloody mess by the deformed car body. Zero endured the pain and tried to stand up. The bridge was already in a mess. Car parts that had been sent flying were strewn everywhere, and the truck was parked not far away, completely blocking off the road. She turned around and found that the back was also blocked by several cement mixers. Even if the car had escaped the crash, it could not have left the highway bridge. If the accident was purely accidental, the driver behind should have come out to rescue her. However, until now, she had not seen anyone. The whole bridge was eerily silent. Normally, she would have burst into tears, but at this moment, even though tears were welling up in her eyes and her body was trembling, she clenched her teeth and did not let the tears fall. Zero had often heard from her uncle that the fallen evils would target those who had awakened the force of nature. This might be a premeditated ambush. In front of the enemy, She could not show weakness. Not only would it not help, but it would also make her situation worse. She was no longer a child, but an awakened martialist. Squeak! A sour sound of friction broke the dead silence on the bridge. The roof of the overturned truck was torn open from the inside, and a figure wearing a mask walked out of the driver's seat. Obviously, no ordinary person could come out unscathed in such a tragic car accident and tear open the truck with his bare hands. Zero could not help but stick close to the wrecked car behind her. Through the mask, she seemed to feel a bone-piercing chill rising from the soles of her feet. Although she could not see the figure's eyes, she could feel that the figure's attention was focused on her, like a poisonous snake staring at its prey. Is this the target you want to deal with? She looks like a little brat who hasn't even grown her hair yet. Following that, two more monsters appeared above the carriage. One could barely be seen as a human, but its limbs were somewhat deformed. The other had wings and fangs, no different from the legendary gargoyles. However, fallen evils could mutate, so it was not strange for them to evolve into anything. Judging from the red cyclones on their chests, Roland could tell that they were fallen evils. This kind of little girl, there's no need to muster such a large force. As long as we find an opportunity to bite her, she won't even have the chance to call for help. Why don't I take her life on behalf of Oracle? The gargoyle-like fallen evil let out a strange laugh and spread its wings, ready to pounce on Zero. However, it was the masked man who stopped it. Happy lifted his finger and pointed down slightly. The enemy who had just jumped up was pushed to the ground by an invisible hand, and the impact was so great that cracks appeared on the bridge. Idiot, who allowed you to act on your own? The masked man said coldly, you have no idea what kind of opponent you are facing. Sir, isn't she a martial artist who has just awakened? The long-armed monster asked in surprise. Yes, but she's not an ordinary martial artist. You can only see her weak cyclones, but I can see the shining light around her. The masked man bowed to the little girl and said, Am I right? The creator of the world, Miss Zero? What the hell is it talking about? Creator? Zero swallowed and said, You may have mistaken me for someone else. So you don't know about this? The masked man was slightly stunned and then laughed. But it doesn't matter. Everything will be over soon. Before that, please allow me to introduce myself. I'm the messenger of God, Delta, from the so-called erosion. Are you going to kill me? That's not accurate. I'm just following the order of God to put everything back on track and return the stolen power to its source, and the world you live in is also a part of it. Oracle, can't we kill her? The gargoyle struggled to get up from the ground, looking confused. Not now, Delta said slowly. As a martial artist, her strength is not worth mentioning, but you should never underestimate a creator, especially in the domain she created. If you act rashly, you will only destroy the plan that we've been planning for a long time. In order to adapt to the rules, the power I can use is less than 1 in 10,000, but she has unlimited possibilities. So before we act, we must cut off her connection with the world, so as to ensure that nothing goes wrong. You don't have to wait too long, the crack will soon form. Zero suddenly realized that the originally gray sky was filled with translucent diamond-shaped patterns, and they were constantly closing in on the center of the bridge. The scenery outside the patterns gradually became blurry, as if they were leaving this world. Don't worry, from the moment you entered this bridge, there's no chance of escape. Those stupid logical beings think that the martial arts tournament is our target? What a joke. The more martial artists they send, the weaker the defense in other places will be. Delta spread his hands. There are thousands of cores hidden under the bridge, and the Martialist Association knows nothing about them. With the magic provided by them, I can pull this area into the crack where the two worlds overlap. In the crack, the realm of mind that you rely on will be interfered with by God, and will no longer be able to help you. We will fight on equal terms here, until one side returns to its origin. Just as he finished speaking, the patterns that filled the sky coincidentally merged together, and everything in the outside world suddenly dimmed, and finally turned pitch black. The bridge that had lost its light source should have also sunk into darkness, but as if the world had been forcefully separated, the light that belonged to this place still existed, and just like before, it illuminated every corner of the crack. "Now, you can do what you want," the masked man said in a deep voice. The two fallen evils looked at each other and simultaneously leaped up, rushing toward Zero one after the other. Zero tightly held onto the frame of the carriage without moving, and to outsiders, she looked as if she had been scared silly. The little girl indeed felt extreme fear, especially when the enemy's hideous and sinister bloody mouth was just inches away from her. If not for Fei Yuhan's warning, it would have been difficult for her to even remain standing. Her mind was blank, but she remembered two things. The moment the car was hit, the driver had completely turned the car horizontally, allowing the driver to face the truck that was sweeping over. At the same time, the other party had pulled her into his embrace, the surging white light had enveloped her in the blink of an eye, and the earth-shattering scene seemed to have become much gentler. And the second thing was the gentle whisper that came from the side of the light. "Don't stray too far from the car, stand up and face the enemy. I will protect you." Even when the gargoyle fallen evil bit down on Zero, she did not retreat even half a step. At this moment, a dazzling silver light shot out from the twisted car, and directly chopped down on the enemy's head. The light disappeared in a flash, and the fallen evil that was charging at the front suddenly froze on the spot. Then, a small crack swelled up from the middle, and its entire body was split into two. Bookseller's website. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.